I remember the night clear as mud, like someone poured ink over the river and left a thin veil of fog floating above it. I'd been on night patrol for hours, the kind of shift where every sound echoes, every movement feels like it's magnified. The station had been quiet, quieter than usual, but that always made me uneasy. There's a difference between silence and absence, and that night, it felt like absence. I had radioed in at the top of the hour, just routine check-ins, letting dispatch know I was moving along the east riverbank. The water had a low hum, a kind of droning presence under the moonlight. My headlights barely cut through the mist curling off the river, and every shadow looked like it belonged to someone or something. It was near Marker 16 when I first noticed the truck. Deputy Harris was supposed to meet me at the old pier around that time, but he wasn't there. Not that I expected him to flash lights or wave, but the silence over the radio was wrong. There's always chatter, even if it's grumbling about the weather or the station's heating. But nothing. Dead air. I eased the cruiser closer to the water, eyes scanning both banks. The river stretched out like a black ribbon, reflecting the night sky, but it wasn't still. Ripples moved against the current, or maybe with it, I couldn't tell. Something about the pattern made my stomach knot, like someone or something was walking underwater just out of sight. Harris, I muttered into the radio, voice shaky despite my effort to sound steady. Nothing but static. I parked near the gravel road that led to the old patrol dock and stepped out. Cold wind bit through my jacket, carrying the scent of mud and rot. The trees along the bank creaked in protest, as if the river had called them to watch. I walked toward the dock, flashlight slicing a narrow path through the fog. Every step made gravel crunch like it was shouting my presence to the world, or to him, if he was still there. The dock was empty. The boat tied up looked untouched, rocking slightly as if something had brushed past it. I leaned over the edge, shining the light into the water. The river swallowed it, black and endless. A small wave licked the post, and I could swear it formed shapes. Hands, faces, nothing I could prove. My heart hammered harder as I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining it. Night shifts did that to you, played tricks on your eyes and ears. Then I noticed the footprints, muddy, deep, leading away from the dock. Not mine, not any patrol boot I'd seen. Big prints, like Harris had been running, but they stopped abruptly at the water's edge. The mud was disturbed further out, fading into nothing, like someone had taken a step and simply vanished. I froze, flashlight trembling in my grip. No wind, no current, just absence. I called him again. Harris, talk to me. My own voice sounded small in the open night. Still nothing. Then, from somewhere upriver, I heard a splash, not close, not near the dock, but somewhere in the dense black. My pulse jumped. My gut told me to leave, to call for backup. But a part of me needed to know. I followed the riverbank, flashlight scanning for any sign of life. Trees swayed gently, the fog wrapping around them like a shroud. Shadows shifted, teasing me, forming shapes in the corner of my eyes. Every time I stopped, the sound of water moving seemed to echo differently, like it was alive, watching me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. This was supposed to be routine, just a patrol, just checking the river, nothing more. A sudden movement made me snap around. There on the opposite bank, or maybe it was closer, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure. Harris? No, too tall, too still. The kind of still that doesn't belong to the living. My mouth went dry, and I fumbled with the radio. Dispatch, I'm going to need a... Static swallowed my words, cutting me off like the night had claimed them. The figure vanished. Just like that. No splash, no sound, nothing. I stepped closer to the water, kneeling to see better. The mud had shifted again, footprints leading back toward the trees, as if whoever or whatever was here had circled. My flashlight caught something reflective in the mud. A badge. Deputy Harris's badge. I froze, picked it up with trembling hands. No blood, no body, just the badge, lying as if left for me to find. Panic started to curl around my chest. I knew the river. I knew these banks. I had patrolled them in every season. rain or snow, and I'd never seen anything like this. There's a rational part of me screaming that Harris could have fallen in, gotten swept away, something mundane. But another part, a part one hated acknowledging, whispered that he hadn't gone anywhere ordinary. I called him one last time, voice breaking. Harris, please talk to me. The fog shifted, almost in response. The river rippled against the posts, and then silence. I stayed there for what felt like hours. The cold seeped through me, numbing fingers and toes. My flashlight illuminated nothing but empty water and swaying trees. I wanted to believe it was over, that maybe Harris had wandered off, had been pulled away by some accident. But the river felt different now. Alive, watching, waiting. I backed toward the cruiser, keeping my eyes on the shadows. Every tree, every bend in the bank seemed alive, as if breathing. The footprints weren't there anymore. It was like the night had swallowed them. The badge in my hand felt heavier than it should, a weight pressing against my chest. When I finally got back to cruiser, I radioed dispatch again. Voice steady, rehearsed. Patrol check. No activity. Area secure. Returning to station. I didn't mention the footprints. I didn't mention the badge. And I didn't mention the river and how it had looked at me. The drive back was worse than the search. Every turn of the wheel felt like it was taking me deeper into that night. Further away from anything safe. The fog clung to the lights, dancing like it had a mind of its own. Every reflective surface caught a flicker. Maybe my headlights, maybe eyes. I tried to tell myself it was tricks of the light. Shadows are always playing on a lonely road. But the unease burrowed deeper with every mile. I couldn't shake the image of the footprints ending at the water's edge. That pause, that absence, it wasn't natural. And the memory of that still, tall figure, it pressed on me in ways I couldn't name. Something had taken him. Something that didn't leave a trace. Something that the river had claimed without moving. By the time I reached the station, I hadn't spoken a word. The silence inside the cruiser felt like it had followed me from the river, heavy and accusing. I parked, stepped inside, and saw the morning shift coming in bright-eyed and oblivious. I nodded at them, exchanged the usual pleasantries, but nothing came out. My hands were still shaking from the cold and the fear I didn't dare name. I filed a report. Routine patrol. No incidents. Missing deputy. Unknown circumstances. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't volunteer answers. Some things are better left in the dark. But at night, when the river hums and the fog rolls thick along the banks, I hear footsteps in the water. I hear splashes that don't belong to anything alive. And I see shadows moving just beyond the light. Sometimes, I swear, I hear a voice calling my name, carried across the river on the wind. I keep telling myself it's nothing. I keep telling myself I'll forget, but the river doesn't forget. And neither do I. The morning after Harris went missing, the river felt different, like it had shifted in some subtle, impossible way. I went back, not because I wanted to, but because I had to see for myself. Patrols don't just vanish, and the thought of leaving him there, swallowed by shadows and water, was unbearable. The fog hung low along the banks, curling over the water like smoke from some unseen fire. My boots sank in the mud as I followed the river downstream, flashlight in one hand, badge clipped to my chest, the other hand brushing against the frozen weeds. The prints were still there, not all of them, just the ones that mattered, the big, deep impressions in the mud, leading straight to the water. I knelt down beside them, the cold seeping into my knees, and traced the edges with a gloved hand. They were Harris's size, Harris's boot pattern. Every step had a crispness to it, as if the weight pressing down on the mud hadn't shifted in decades. But the final print, at the river's edge, was the worst. The toes dug in, the heel barely there, and then nothing. No splash, no ripple beyond the faintest concentric circles that could have been from the wind. The print ended like a question mark, suspended in the mud, daring me to answer it. I swallowed hard. There's a part of you, when you're alone on a night shift, that knows fear isn't always rational. I knew what it meant. The river had taken him. But it wasn't just water. Something had been waiting. Something that didn't obey the rules I knew. I could feel it watching me, even though I hadn't seen anything yet. I scanned the river, flashlight beams slicing through the morning fog. The current looked normal, even lazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was alive, pulsing, as if it had lungs and a heartbeat. I leaned closer to the edge, the mud soft under my fingers. My reflection in the water looked back at me, tired, pale, but it wasn't quite right. The eyes were too dark, too hollow. I blinked and it was gone. Something shifted behind me. A subtle crunch in the gravel that wasn't mine. My hand flew to the radio. Dispatch, this is static. Nothing else. Just static. My throat went dry. I turned, scanning the bank, flashlight trembling in my grip. No one. Nothing. The fog had thickened, weaving around the trees and brush like it had a mind of its own. I stepped back, taking careful measurements of each print. My boots sank into the mud as I followed them upstream a little, hoping for some clue, some explanation. But it wasn't like that. The prints weren't meandering. They weren't clumsy. They were purposeful, methodical. They led directly to the water, stopping abruptly, leaving the rest to imagination. I could almost hear him, whispering over the current, carried away on the mist, calling my name. But when I leaned close to the edge, there was nothing but the sound of the river moving over itself. No voice, no splash, just the cold, the mud pressed against my knees, the faint smell of decayed leaves, and the footprints. The river had a curve here, a shallow bend where the current slowed. That's where it got worse. I saw them, more prints, shallower, broken, as if someone had struggled underwater, trying to escape, only to vanish. They weren't arranged like a struggle on land. They were almost deliberate, dragging toward the center, then stopping. My stomach churned as I traced them with my flashlight. I remembered something Harris had said last week, joking about the river, saying, "Sometimes it hides things you don't want to find." I had laughed then. I hadn't laughed now. The truth hit me in a quiet, oppressive wave. The river wasn't hiding anything. It was waiting, and it had taken him. I knelt at the water's edge, feeling the chill seep into my gloves, and stared. My reflection wavered like oil on water, shadows rippling in the corners of my vision. And then I saw it, a disturbance beneath the surface. Not ripples, not waves, but something shifting in the mud at the bottom, moving against the current. Something that shouldn't be able to .my pulse spiked. I leaned closer, almost instinctively, try and make sense of it. A finger of water reached up, curling like a hand. I jerked back, heart hammering, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing. The river looked calm, the mud untouched, and yet I knew Harris had been there. Knew he wasn't coming back in any way I could accept. The air felt heavier, a wide breath fog in front of me, the fog rolling thicker, folding over itself. I imagined the prints walking back toward me, and I could almost hear them pressing against the mud, making a sound only I could hear. My hands shook, my knees shook. I wanted to run, to tell someone, to call anyone. But who would believe that footprints could lead straight into the water and simply stop? I walked along the edge, following a line of prints like a compass pointing to nowhere. The river whispered at me, brushing my boots with cold fingers. Every step made my stomach turn. Shadows moved just out of the corner of my eye, trees bending slightly toward me as if to listen. My flashlight caught glimpses of shapes in the fog, dark, twisted, just beyond the range of light. And then, nothing. Silence. I knelt again at the final print. My hands hovered over it, feeling the weight of absence. The water lapped softly at the edge, but the imprint in the mud seemed to vibrate with something older than me, older than the river itself, a presence that had been waiting for Harris, and now watched me. I imagined a cold hand pressing down on my shoulder, and I jerked upright, but no one was there. The river stretched endlessly, gray and unreadable. I scanned the bank, searching for anything. Branches broken, leaves disturbed, mud patterns that made sense. Nothing. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something had followed the footprints upstream. Something patient and waiting. My throat went dry again. I spoke into the mist. "Harris, where are you?" No answer. The sun was beginning to rise, though the fog kept it muted, turning everything a flat, lifeless gray. I walked back toward my cruiser, every step slower than the last, feeling the eyes of the river on me, the unseen watching every movement. The mud clung to my boots like it wanted to remember me. I sat in the cruiser, tried to convince myself to call in to make the report. But what could I say? Deputy missing. River looks wrong. Footprints lead into the water. Probably gone. It sounded insane even as I thought it. Yet I couldn't forget. Every detail burned into my mind. The pattern of the prints, the way the river shifted, the fog curling like smoke above the water. Hours later, back at the station, I couldn't shake it. I saw the prints in my dreams, stretched across the water, leading somewhere I couldn't follow. I heard the river's whispers in the hallways, felt the damp chill of mud under my fingernails, even though I'd washed my hands. And sometimes, when the night shifts are quiet and the station hums like a living thing, I swear I hear footsteps along the riverbank again, following me, calling for him, or maybe for me. I don't know if he's still there. I don't know if he was ever there in a way I can understand. All I know is that the river remembers. The footprints remember. And if you look too closely, if you go near the water, it will remember you too. I hadn't planned on going back to the river so soon. The fog had lifted a little from the morning after Harris vanished, but the memory of those footprints gnawed at me like a dog with a bone. I told myself it was just my imagination, that rivers swallow things, and we tell stories to make sense of it. But I needed to see. I needed to know. The cruiser's headlights cut through the early mist as I rolled down the dirt path toward the river. Every step closer made the air heavier, damp with a chill that settled in my lungs. I parked near the bank where the prints had disappeared, my eyes scanning the water. Calm, lazy, indifferent. Too calm, too lazy. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, boots squishing in the mud. I followed the line of prints again, tracing the path that had ended so abruptly, staring at the water as if it could explain itself. And that's when I saw it, a ripple. Faint at first, but deliberate, cutting through the gray surface like a finger reaching up from the bottom. I froze. The fog hung still, swallowing sound, and the river whispered only to me. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand. I tried to convince myself it was debris, a stick, maybe a fish, but I just knew it wasn't. It surfaced slowly, almost lazily, but the movement was wrong. Too deliberate, too controlled. The shape was vague at first, a dark, wet mass that broke the water like it hated being contained. My stomach lurched. I felt the chill of the mud again, even though my boots were dry by comparison. The shape lifted higher, and I could see it better. Ahead? No, not ahead. Not human. Something elongated, slick with mud and river grime, glistening under the weak morning light. The eyes, or what felt like eyes, gleamed faintly, reflecting my flashlight in sharp, unnatural ways. They weren't curious, weren't questioning. They were aware, watching, waiting. I stumbled back, the flashlight swinging and cutting erratic beams through the fog. My hand shook, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Harris, I called, voice sharp in silence. The river answered with a soft splash, as if to remind me that nothing human could survive here. The thing moved again, slowly, rising like it had been waiting for me all along. Its limbs, if you'd call them that, twisted unnaturally, thin and long, moving through the water without making a sound. The river seemed to part for it, bending around it like it knew it belonged. My mind screamed to look away, to run, but I couldn't. Something rooted me there, staring into the impossible, feeling the weight of it pressing into my chest. I remembered Harris's boots, the way they had pressed into the mud, the prints that led here, and the way they had ended. I swallowed hard, trying to breathe normally, but the river had swallowed my reason too. The thing in the water looked at me, not like it wanted to hurt me, exactly, but like it knew I wasn't supposed to be here, like it knew the limits of what humans could survive and tested them anyway. A low, wet sound came from the river, like a throat clearing underwater. I stumbled back again, mud clinging to my boots, flashlight bouncing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leave, but something compelled me to stay, to watch, to see what had come back. Its shape shifted, rising partially from the water. The torso was thin, almost skeletal, but glistened with the river's grime. Its arms stretched too long, moving with fluidity that defied joints. Its head tilted in impossible ways, like it was listening to the wind, to me, to the river itself. I realized then, it had been here before Harris had vanished, waiting, patient, immortal in its quiet. I could feel it judging me, testing my fear, pressing at the edges of my mind. I blinked and it was closer, though it hadn't moved in a way I could track. My flashlight trembled, the beam shaking across its surface. It was wet, covered in mud and river slime, but I could see parts that shimmered like scales. Its mouth opened, and I wanted to hear words, wanted to find familiarity, but no sound came, only a wet, sucking noise like the river itself breathing. I stumbled backward into mud, boots sinking deeper, and for the first time I allowed myself to think, Harris, was this what took him? Or was it something else that followed him here, waiting for the next to wander too close? The thought made my skin crawl, goose flesh rising along my arms. It leaned forward, almost gently, as if acknowledging my presence. I noticed in the water around it. The current wasn't moving the way it should. Waves formed, folded, bent around the shape, obeying some invisible command. It could have disappeared at any moment. I knew that, but it didn't. It watched, and I watched. I tried to call dispatch, to tell someone, but my radio crackled, then died. Static, my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to take a step back, but my boots stuck in the mud. I was trapped by the bank, by the fog, by whatever had come back. I forced myself to breathe, slowly, feeling the fear settle in my bones. I had to document this. For evidence, for sanity, for the truth. I pulled out my phone, hoping the camera could capture it, but the screen lit up the fog in white light. And when I pointed at the river, the thing was gone. Just the current, rippling lazily, calm again. No shape, no splash, no trace. Only the faint impression of disturbed mud where it had broken the surface. I sank to my knees, chest heaving. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to convince myself I had imagined it. But deep down I knew better. I could feel it, watching, waiting, patient as the river itself. My mind raced, trying to piece together rational explanations. But the prince told me everything. Harris hadn't gone willingly. The river had claimed him, and something else had surfaced. Something that wasn't human. Something that understood the river in a way I could never hope to. I stayed there for hours, moving only enough to keep my balance. I watched the water, half expecting it to rise and pull me in too. The sun climbed higher, weak and muted through the fog, but I barely noticed. My flashlight lay across my knees, casting trembling shadows. Every ripple, every whisper of movement made me jump, and yet I couldn't leave. I needed to know. I needed to see. By the time I forced myself back to the cruiser, the thing had vanished completely, leaving only the faintest swirl in the mud. I drove slowly, eyes on the river, listening to the soft slap of tires against the dirt road, feeling watched even though nothing was there. Every shadow along the bank seemed to stretch unnaturally, leaning closer to the water. At the station, I wrote my report, careful, trying to leave out what couldn't be explained, but every word felt like a lie. I didn't write about what surfaced, about the impossible shape in the water, the way the river abated. I didn't write about the eyes. I didn't write about the waiting. That night in my bed, I could still see it, rising slowly, emerging from the river, dripping with mud and ancient water, waiting, patient, judging me. I couldn't shake it. Every night I dreamed of the river, of the prince, of the shape that isn't human, but isn't entirely a thing either. And I know if I go back, it will be there, waiting, patient, ready to surface for whoever comes too close. The river doesn't forget. The footprints don't lie. And whatever came back that day, whatever I saw, it remembers too. The report said accident. That's what they always say when bodies are found in the river, floating limp and cold. Accidental drowning. The words looked clean on the page, typed neatly by a clerk with no idea what the river held at night. But I knew better. I had seen the footprints. I had seen what came back. And Harris hadn't drowned by accident. The sheriff's office smelled of coffee and old paper, the kind that clings to everything and never leaves. I sat at my desk, pen hovering over the report, staring at the words I had to write. I wanted them to be official, sterile, believable. But every time I tried to write accidental drowning, my hand shook and I had to stop. I could feel the water again, thick and dark, the shape that had risen and judged me. Sheriff Daniels leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed, eyes narrowed in that way he always did when he suspected I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. "You sure about this?" he asked, not questioning the paperwork, questioning me. I rubbed my eyes. "Sure? I mean, the body's in the water. It looks like I faltered. It looks like he drowned." Daniel shook his head slowly, like he was trying to force the words into place himself. "Looks can lie. You've been down there. You saw the prints, right?" I didn't answer at first. I couldn't. I'd replayed it 100 times in my head. The way the water had shifted around that thing. The way it had moved like it knew the river better than any of us ever could. The footprints had gone straight in, swallowed by the current. Harris had followed them. And then, nothing. Yes, I admitted finally. I saw the prints. I saw something. Daniels didn't flinch. Didn't act like he didn't believe me. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "That river's older than any of us, older than the town. It keeps secrets, but it doesn't give them freely. You think Harris drowned because he slipped? Because the current was strong? I don't. You don't get prints like that without something else taking notice." I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. "Then why does the report say accident?" He shrugged, the weight of the office pressing down around him. "Because some things can't be explained to the public. Because if you start telling everyone about whatever's out there, you'll have a panic on your hands. The river takes people. It has for generations. Sometimes we get lucky. Sometimes we don't. The law wants closure, not fear." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that what I had seen wasn't luck. It was deliberate, but the word stuck in my throat. How do you explain something that doesn't exist in any textbook? Something that floats beneath the surface? Patient, aware, waiting? I returned to the report, hands shaking, trying to write something believable. I detailed the scene, the riverbank slick with mud, the boots, the way the current had pulled him. Nothing about the elongated shape. Nothing about the eyes glinting in the morning fog. Nothing about the silent, impossible rise from the water. No mention of the thing that had come back, that would stay in my mind, pressing at the edges of reason, haunting my thoughts while I typed words that weren't true. Daniels tapped the desk with his fingers, steady and precise. "You've done your duty. The rest is for us to know, not them." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in the office, even inside walls that should have felt safe. The river's presence lingered in my chest, in my arms, in the way my fingers trembled over the keyboard. Harris wasn't just gone. Something else had risen to take notice, to claim what belonged to the river. Later, I went down to the evidence locker, tried to process, trying to touch something tangible, something real. Harris's jacket hung there, stiff with mud and river silt. I ran my fingers over it, hoping for answers, for reassurance, for proof that this was just a terrible accident. But it smelled of wet earth and something older, something that had been in the water far longer than any of us had known. I remembered the way the thing had moved, how it had twisted, almost leisurely, as if it knew it could do anything and nothing would stop it. And in my memory, the river seemed to stretch further than the map showed, winding like a living thing. Secret bends and hidden pools no one had ever charted. Harris had wandered into those secrets, and now, officially, he was just a statistic, a case closed. That night, the office was empty except for me and the hum of the fluorescent lights. I tried to sleep in the squad room, but the ceiling tile seemed to sway, the shadows in the corners creeping closer. Every time I blinked, I imagined seeing the dark, wet shape of something surfacing behind the building. In the floodlights' glare, I forced myself to lie still, to breathe, telling myself it was exhaustion, imagination, the stress of the river and the lost deputy. But I couldn't stop thinking about the prints. Harris's boots disappearing into the current, the way the water had shifted around the thing. Patient, judging, waiting. And I knew that if someone else came too close, the river would remember. The river always remembered. By morning, Daniels was gone, off to paperwork and other calls, leaving me alone with the report. I read it over again. Accidental drowning. Clean, concise, official. The words burned in my chest. I wanted to rip them up, to rewrite them in ink black as the river at night. But the law didn't care for truth. Not when truth came with shapes no one was ready to see. I walked outside, looking toward the river through the haze of early daylight. The current moved quietly, innocuous, as if nothing had happened, as if Harris had slipped and drowned like the report said. But I remembered the way the thing had moved through the water. The impossible rise, the wet glint of mud and scales in the weak light. I remembered the silence, thick and heavy, as if the river itself had held its breath. Later, someone would come to see the scene, take photos, measure the bank, tally the water levels. They would leave thinking they understood, thinking they knew, and I would stand aside, knowing the truth. Something lurked there, something older than law, older than reason, older than the town itself. And now, officially, Harris was just another name, another number, another mile marker in the river's endless ledger. I drove home slowly, passing the bends and banks, imagining the river stretching further than it should, twisting in ways the maps didn't account for. I saw shadows where there shouldn't have been any, ripples where the current had been calm. Every tree line, every foggy bank seemed to pulse with life, patient and watchful. By the time I reached my house, the weight of the night pressed into me fully. I sat in the car for a long while, gripping the wheel, feeling the pulse of the river in my veins. Harris was gone, officially drowned. But I knew, and Daniels knew, that the river hadn't finished with him. The water had claimed him, yes, but something else had risen, something deliberate, and I was left with in my mind a quiet, terrible awareness that the river didn't just take. It waited. I couldn't shake the image. The dark, wet shape gliding beneath the surface, the mud dripping from its limbs, the eyes reflecting my flashlight, patient, patient, patient. And I knew, when night returned, when the fog rolled in thick over banks, someone else would come too close. Someone else would leave footprints that vanished into the current. And the river would remember. Always. The office was quiet, too quiet, and the clock on the wall ticked in a rhythm that felt more like a heartbeat than a timepiece. Night had fallen hours ago, the kind of darkness that presses against the windows and seems to breathe along with you. I was alone, the only light coming from the dull glow of the desk lamp and the green numbers of the police scanner resting in the corner. I flipped open the first folder, the top labeled missing, open cases. Dust rose in a faint swirl as I lifted it, carried by the stale air of an office that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Every case in these folders had a face attached to it, a person who vanished from their life without explanation, leaving only questions behind. Some had been gone for weeks, some for months, and a few for years. I ran my finger along the names. Jenny Mallory, 17, disappeared on her way home from a party. Paul Hendricks, 42, last seen leaving the diner where he worked the late shift. And then there were the others. Cases so cold the paper seemed to have absorbed the fear from first report. I tried to keep my focus on the facts. Dates, locations, witness statements. But the deeper I read, the harder it became to pretend these were just statistics. Sometimes I could feel the absence in the words, the quiet desperation between lines, the way a blank spot on a map could feel like a weight pressing against my chest. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. The office felt smaller at night, tighter, as if the shadows themselves were leaning closer to listen. I kept telling myself it was just fatigue, the long hours, the late night shift making the building feel alive in a way it never did during the day. Then I opened the next folder. This one was different. There were footprints noted along a riverbank, a partial note left on a kitchen table, a car found abandoned at a deserted rest stop. Each clue led nowhere, and yet the way the cases stacked together felt like a trail of disappearances that I couldn't ignore. My pulse quickened as I flipped through the pages, scanning each detail for connections that weren't supposed to exist. I remember the call I got last week, the one about the kid found wandering along the old highway, muttering about a man who had disappeared and watched from the woods. The details were sketchy, barely enough to file a report, but enough to make me glance nervously at the windows. The woods outside the office looked black, impenetrable, silent, and in the quiet, I swore I could hear the faintest crack of a branch, a rustle that didn't belong. I shook my head. Focus. Focus on the files. The names blurred together as I read. Michael Trent, Kimberly James, Sean Ellis. Each one left behind a void, an emptiness that I couldn't measure. Some families had moved on, accepting the official line, runaway, lost, accident. But I knew better. I had seen what people never saw. Shadows lingering longer than they should, shapes in the corner of your vision, echoes of sound that had no source. I turned to a case from 10 years ago, an old cold file that had been buried beneath layers of paper for a decade. The report described a man who vanished from his home on a stormy night. No witnesses, no footprints, no bodies, just a house left intact. Doors locked, lights on but completely empty. It was the kind of disappearance that gnaws at you, festers, and refuses to let go. I traced my finger over the typed words, feeling the weight of it, the weight of the past press against me through ink and paper. The office heater clicked off, and the sudden chill made me pull my jacket tighter around me. Outside, the wind whispered against the walls, a low hum that seemed almost like voices. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. Voices in the wind. Absurd. But the folders in front of me felt heavier, like they were alive, like the names inside them were aware that I was here, sifting through their stories. I picked up a pencil and began taking notes, trying to find patterns, locations, dates, times. Certain roads seemed to appear repeatedly, stretches of highway where multiple disappearances had occurred, places I patrol hundreds of nights myself, now taking on a new, sinister weight. Every case started to look like it was connected, threads weaving into something I wasn't ready to see. The clock ticked past midnight. My eyes burned, and my hands ached from holding the folders open so long. I tried to stand, stretch, shake the tension from my shoulders, but the office felt like it was closing in, folding around me. Shadows pulled under fluorescent lights, shifting slightly, stretching toward me. I told myself it was my imagination. It had to be. And then I heard it. A faint tapping, soft and irregular, coming from the far corner of the room. I froze. The sound wasn't any rhythm I recognized, not the usual creaks of the building settling or the pipes of the heating system. It was deliberate, careful, like someone or something was trying to get my attention. I swallowed hard, listening. Nothing. I leaned forward, heart hammering, telling myself it was the wind, the building, anything but what it felt like. A presence, something patient, waiting, watching. I tried to focus on the files, but the tapping came again, quieter this time, almost under my breath, just at the edge of hearing. I turned slowly, scanning the dark corners, the hallway beyond the office door, the spaces between walls and ceilings where shadows gather. Nothing moved. Nothing was there. I leaned back, closing my eyes, breathing in deeply. Focus. Just the files. Focus. I opened the next folder. A young woman vanished after leaving her shift at a diner. A man disappeared from his front porch during a summer thunderstorm. A teenager never returned from a late-night movie. Every case had one thing in common. No witnesses, no bodies, no explanation that satisfied the mind. Only absence, only questions. I scribbled down notes obsessively, connecting dots on a map, highlighting highways, rivers, old logging roads. And in the quiet, I imagined the people themselves, frozen somewhere between the world they knew and the one they had stumbled into. I imagined their eyes wide, watching, waiting, aware that someone like me might be piecing together their story years later, in a cold office with the wind whispering outside. A creak echoed through the hallway. My pen hovered over the paper. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was a building. I told myself it was nothing. But even as I reasoned, even as I tried to anchor myself in daylight logic, I could feel it, the sensation of being observed, the way the shadows leaned just a little closer, the way the room seemed to hum with tension, quiet and patient. I shut the folders, stacking them neatly. Even though I knew I would reopen them, the stories wouldn't leave me. They never did. Every missing person left a mark, an imprint on the night shift that no report could erase. My eyes drifted to the window, and I could swear I saw a figure, a brief glint of motion, standing under the yellow glow of the parking lot light. On the instant I blinked. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, heart still racing. The files were closed, but I couldn't close the memory, the feeling, the weight of all the absent faces staring back at me. Alone with the files, alone with the names. I understood why the night shift changes people. It wasn't the late hours, the isolation. It was the knowing that out there in the darkness, something waits for those who think the world is quiet, for those who think absence is simple. I turned off the desk lamp. The green glow of the scanner remained low and steady, humming softly in the silence. I could hear the wind through the cracked window, low and mournful. I knew I wouldn't sleep tonight, or maybe for many nights. I would sit here, alone with the files, the names, the echoes of people who vanished without a trace, and somewhere beyond the reach of the fluorescent light on my office walls, whatever watched, waited, patient, quiet. I finally pushed my chair back, standing slowly. The office smelled of paper, coffee, and something else I couldn't name. Something wet, lingering, as if it had seeped from the folders themselves. I glanced at the clock. Nearly 2 a.m. No calls, no emergencies. Just the quiet, just the missing, just the weight of knowing what no one else could see. I picked up my coat and slung it over my shoulders. One last look at the files stacked neatly on the desk. The names stared back at me. Faces I had never met, lives I couldn't save. But their story wasn't finished. Not yet. And I, alone with the files, was left with the understanding that the night doesn't forgive, the missing don't rest, and the shadows, patient and knowing, never leave. I locked the office door behind me, the key heavy in my hand. Outside, the night pressed in, quiet but alive, and I felt it. The sensation that the stories, the disappearances, the unsolved mysteries were still watching, waiting, and I was alone. I should have known something was off the moment I stepped into the station that night. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, flickering in that lazy rhythm that always made shadows stretch like they were alive. The night had been quiet, the radio silent for first hour, and I'd been going through paperwork, trying to keep my mind occupied. But as I passed the main hallway, I heard it, the softest scrape of footsteps. I froze. My boots echoed against the linoleum, and I waited, telling myself it was just the building settling. Old stations creak. Pipes groan. It's the wind. But the sound came again, closer this time, deliberate, echoing as if someone or something was walking the same hall I was. I glanced at the doors leading to the evidence room, the interrogation rooms, the small briefing office. All closed, all locked. I was sure of it. And yet, the sound persisted, following me down the hallway. Hello. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, thin, almost swallowed by the shadows. No answer, of course. Nothing ever answers in situations like this. The hallway stretched, dark and quiet, except for the faint tapping of unseen steps. I checked the lock on the front door. Locked. I had locked it myself before heading to the break room, and no one else was supposed to be on shift. My stomach tightened, and I felt that familiar edge of unease creep up my spine, that cold trickle of fear that isn't panic. Not yet, but close enough to make your skin prickle. I returned to the hallway, trying to convince myself I had imagined it, but then I heard it. A door creak, slow, deliberate. It wasn't any door I had touched. The evidence room. The kind of creak that comes from hinges under strain, bending under their own weight, opening just a crack as if testing the air. I could see the gap in the doorway, shadows pooling inside, dark and silent. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. This isn't funny, I muttered. The words echoed down the hallway, swallowed by the hum of the fluorescent lights. I thought about calling dispatch, letting someone know I was here, but my hands felt frozen around the radio. My voice caught in my throat. Something in me wanted to wait, to see, to understand before making any sound beyond that hallway. Footsteps again, soft, patient, coming closer, circling me, yet I could never tell which direction they came from. It was as if the sound came from the walls themselves, bouncing, refusing to settle in one place. I turned slowly, scanning every shadow, every corner. Nothing, nothing but the flicker of light, and the worn linoleum beneath my boots. I reach for the evidence room door, half afraid to touch it, half afraid not to. My fingers graze the handle, cold metal, and I expected resistance. There was none. The door swung open with the softest creak, stopping just short of fully opening, as if waiting for me to step inside. I froze. Something about that small gap, that deliberate motion, felt alive. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't a loose hinge. It moved on its own, and my chest tightened as 1,000 memories of calls I'd taken over the years pressed in. Reports of missing people, bodies found in strange places, calls that never made sense. The quiet, the waiting, the way nothing is ever truly alone. I shook my head, forcing my legs to move. I stepped closer, just to look, just to make sure it was nothing. The hallway behind me stretched impossibly, longer than it should have, the light fading into darkness where the office ended. A draft kissed the back of my neck, carrying a faint scent of damp wood, and something else I couldn't name. Footsteps. Closer. I spun around. Empty hallway. Just walls and light flickering. My heart pounded. My ears strained, trying to catch the rhythm of the steps. They weren't mine. Not mine. Not yet. I opened the door fully, letting it swing on its own hinges, revealing the evidence room. Empty. Shelves lined with boxes and files. Labels fading. The air smelled of old paper, dust, and a faint copper tang. Blood? I shook my head, breathing rapidly, telling myself I was imagining it, that the stress and fatigue were catching up. I had worked enough late nights to know this feeling. Still, the sound persisted. Footsteps circling outside, soft tap-tap, sometimes fading, sometimes coming closer. The shadows along the far walls seemed to lean forward slightly, moving with a rhythm that my brain couldn't reconcile with reality. I turned back to the office, thinking maybe I should call someone, radio it in, but as I lifted the handset, the line crackled. Static, low, buzzing, almost whispering. Not words, but a tone, like something testing the boundaries of the night, pushing against quiet. I dropped the handset and it fell with a soft thud. Startling me more than anything, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then another creak. The interrogation room door, down the hall, moved just enough for me to see the shadow shift behind it. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven. My pulse filled my ears. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run. But something kept my feet rooted, my eyes fixed on the door. I stepped forward, slow, careful, counting each step on the linoleum. The shadow didn't move. It waited, patient, observant. I reached for the door handle, metal cold beneath my fingers. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. Another shadow crossing the ceiling. I spun to see nothing, just the lights overhead, buzzing lazily. A laugh, soft, almost a breath, barely there. I froze. My skin prickled. My mouth went dry. The sound had no source. It wasn't my own, not mine. Something in the air shifted, heavy, deliberate, like a presence exhaling. I took another step. The door creaked open on its own, slowly, silently, not swinging as if moved by a breeze, but bending, deliberate, almost sentient. I couldn't explain it. I shouldn't have tried, but I did. I stepped inside. Nothing, just the room, chairs pushed under tables, files stacked neatly. The shadows pooled along the corners. I let out a shaky breath, leaning against the wall, telling myself I was imagining it, that it was the quiet of the night, the isolation of the shift. But my hands shook, my chest ached, and the room felt impossibly cold. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. Behind me. Slow. Careful. Only this time. They weren't on the linoleum. They were softer, coming from the doorway, circling me. I turned sharply. Nothing. Empty. The door to the hallway still hung open, swaying slightly as if breathing. A whisper, barely audible, a rustle like words just at the edge of hearing. I tilted my head, straining. The hair on my arms rose. Nothing came from my mouth, nothing from the hall, yet the air felt thick, alive, almost watching. I realized then I hadn't been alone in the station. I hadn't been all night. Something had been moving with me, waiting, following, patient, and I had seen the doors move, felt the steps echo, smelled the faint tang of something else. Something that didn't belong. I moved toward the front of the station. Every step made the shadows tremble. Every flicker of light seemed to dance with a will of its own. The main door, locked hours ago, creaked. Slowly, deliberately, it eased open just enough for a figure to be glimpsed in the dark beyond. A figure that wasn't there before. My heart leapt. I ran, or I thought about it. But my feet felt like they were sinking into the floor. Another step. Footsteps behind me, echoing, but not matching mine. I didn't dare look. I couldn't, but I could feel it. Moving, waiting, watching, always watching. I reached the lobby. The door hung open now. Shadows spilling into the room, stretching toward me. My radio crackled again. Just static. But this time, I swear I hummed a single note. A note that resonated with the air, with the building, with something that felt alive. I stepped back, trying to pull the door closed, to lock it again, but the handle slipped in my hand. A pressure like a weight pressed from the other side. The door creaked forward again, inexorably, refusing to let me close it. And then I heard it clearly, unmistakable. Footsteps coming straight for me, slow and deliberate. I turned sharply, but the hall was empty. My pulse rattled my skull. I could feel the shadows pressing in from every side. The station, the building, the night itself seemed to lean closer, waiting. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But all I could do was breathe, slow, shallow, try and convince myself it was just a night, just my mind. It wasn't my mind. The footsteps circled again, and the doors creaked, moving on their own. I realized then that the station wasn't empty. It had never been empty. And whatever was here was patient, deliberate, and aware that I was alone, but not alone that I didn't sleep that night. I didn't leave. I stayed, sitting in the corner, watching the doors, listening to the footsteps, feeling the presence of shadows. I didn't understand what I had witnessed. I still don't. But I know this. The station had a rhythm all its own, a heartbeat hidden beneath the walls. And the doors, the floors, the hallways, they all remembered. They all waited. And sometimes they walk while you watch. The night was quieter than it should have been. Even for a late shift at the station, there's usually the hum of fluorescent lights, the soft thrum of the ventilation system, something to remind you that the world is moving outside. But that night, it felt like the building had swallowed all sound. Every creak, every sigh of the walls, every flutter of the old papers on the desk seemed louder than it had any right to be. I was reviewing files again, the cold, lonely cases of people who had disappeared, when I noticed a mirror in the hallway. It wasn't anything unusual, just a full-length mirror near the squad room, the kind everyone ignored because it reflected only the beige walls and the flickering lights. But that night, I saw something I couldn't explain. I was hunched over the desk, and in the reflection, I caught a movement behind me, a shadow, subtle, shifting at the edge of the glass. I spun around, heart-hammering, but the hallway was empty. No one there, just a long stretch of linoleum, the closed doors, the dim light. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a flicker of the fluorescence. That's all it had to be. But when I looked back at the mirror, the reflection didn't match the empty hallway. There were figures standing there, faces half hidden in shadow. I blinked. The shapes shimmered slightly, like smoke caught in the corner of your eye. I leaned closer, trying to see clearly. There was a man, tall, his uniform old, faded, like from decades ago. His eyes were dark, empty, and they fixed on me, even though no one had been in that hallway. Next to him, a woman, her hair long and wet, clinging to her face as if she'd been pulled from a river. And behind them, a child, small, pale, staring. All of them motionless, waiting. I swallowed hard. My hands shook. No, no, no. I whispered. The reflection wavered, like heat rising off asphalt in the sun. And then it was gone. Just me, hunched over the desk, staring at my own wide-eyed face. I tried to convince myself it was stress, late nights, fatigue, staring at files that never had answers. That was it. It had to be. I rubbed my eyes and stood, shaking the image from my mind. But when I passed a mirror again, I froze. The figures were back. Not all of them, just the shapes of two men this time. They were closer, standing just behind my reflection. Their mouths moved, slow, whispering, but I couldn't hear the words. I wanted to turn and run, to confront them, to scream, but my body refused. I was rooted to the spot, mesmerized, horrified. I leaned closer, careful, straining to hear. The air around me had grown heavy, thick, like walking underwater. My skin prickled, hair standing on end. The faces in the glass weren't moving like humans. They were still, too still, perfect imitations of life without the warmth of it. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes from the reflection. And then one of them smiled. Not a friendly smile. It was twisted, almost wrong, too slow, stretching across a face that should not have been capable of expression. The man's eyes locked with mine, and I swear I felt a pulse, a heartbeat emanating from the glass itself. I spun around, empty hallway, my pulse thundering in my ears. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The only sound, the only reality, seemed to be the creak of the old station and the rustle of papers. But I knew, somehow, that the mirror had more truth than anything else around me. I went back to my desk, trying to shake it off, trying to tell myself I had imagined it, but the feeling lingered, thick in the air, pressing against my chest. I dared not look into any reflective surface. Windows, computer screens, even the glossy covers of the folders. Every reflective surface was a potential doorway, every surface a trap. The hours passed. The station stayed unnaturally quiet. The shadows lengthened and shortened as the flickering lights played tricks on me. And each time I dared to glance at the hallway mirror, the figures were there, always changing. Sometimes just one face, sometimes three, always staring, always waiting. I remembered the reports, cold files I'd gone through earlier that night. Missing people, long stretches of road, small towns, night shifts. And for a brief, horrifying instant, I realized they were in the mirror. Every face I had just seen, some of them I recognized from files. Names, dates, locations. People who had vanished. People who should not have been anywhere. Yet here they were, reflected back at me. My breath caught in my throat. The mirror wasn't showing me what was in the hallway. It was showing me who had been forgotten, who had never truly left. The missing, the disappeared. And somehow, I was part of it now. Somehow, by seeing them, acknowledging them, I had invited them closer. I stumbled backward, trying to turn away, but my own reflection moved faster than I did. My mirror itself trembled, distorted, and behind me, a new face appeared. Familiar, too familiar. My own face, twisted, older, hollow-eyed, staring at me from behind the reflection. It wasn't me, but it was me. And then I understood. The mirror wasn't just showing the dead. It was showing what could happen if you stayed too long, if you lingered too close to the shadows that hid in the edges of the night. I could hear it then, a soft, wet whisper, barely audible, coming from the glass. "Stay," it said. Not a voice I recognized, but one I felt in my bones. I stepped back, fell against the desk, heart racing. I tried to reason. It's a mirror. Nothing can step out of a mirror. It's a reflection. That's all. Rational, logical, safe. But the footsteps began again. Behind me, circling, soft, careful, echoing off walls that weren't there. And every time I glanced back at the mirror, the faces multiplied. More men, more women, more children. Some familiar from the files, some unknown, some older, some younger, all staring, waiting. Silent accusations in their eyes, silent demands. I fled the hallway, back to the break room, back to the station's main office. Tried to lock doors, tried to steady my breathing, tried to convince myself that mirrors can't hold life. But when I dared to glance again, through the window glass to the outside, at the polished steel of the copier, at the computer monitor, all showed the same thing. Faces, watching, waiting. I realized then that it wasn't a question of mirrors showing things that weren't there. It was that the things in the mirrors were always there, always waiting, always part of the night. And for hours, I had ignored them, thinking they were tricks of light, tricks of mind, tricks of exhaustion. But they weren't. And I knew in that cold, sinking realization that the station had its own memory, its own consciousness. It remembered every disappearance, every late-night call, every empty hallway, every soul that vanished into its shadowed folds. And when the night was quiet enough, when the lights buzzed and flickered just so, the station showed you what it had collected. The clock ticked past 3 in the morning. I hadn't moved from the chair. I hadn't breathed freely. I hadn't dared turn my back on any reflective surface. And then, in the mirror by the main hallway, I saw it. My own face, pale, wide-eyed, staring back with the same hollow, accusing expression as all the others. And behind it, dozens of faces pressed close, waiting for me to blink, to step closer, to acknowledge them fully. I realized then I couldn't look away. Not entirely. Because the moment I did, I would vanish like the others. Not out of the station, not physically, but from memory, from existence. The station would hold me, my reflection joining the others, waiting silently for the next person to arrive. I sat there, trembling, unable to move, unable to call out, staring at the glass that reflected not me, but everyone who had been lost, waiting for something I couldn't name. Something patient, deliberate, eternal. And I knew the night wasn't over. The doors would continue to creak. The floors would continue to hum. The shadows would continue to linger. And the mirrors would continue to show faces that should never exist. Faces that somehow insisted on being seen that I stayed awake until dawn, staring into that glass, knowing that the second I blinked too long, the station would claim another face, another whisper, another soul to haunt the endless, silent hallways. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I would never forget any of them. Because some reflections never leave. The station never felt smaller until that night. I'd been working the late shift for years, and I knew every corner, every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of the old fluorescent lights. But this night, something had changed. Or maybe it was me. I had been going through the missing persons files again. The ones that never seemed to make sense, the ones that never led anywhere. Some of them were cold for decades, names lost to time. Others were recent, whispers of people gone from quiet farms or rural highways. But when I looked around the station, I started to notice something I couldn't ignore. The hallways weren't empty. Not exactly. Not in the way I'd thought. At first, it was subtle. A shadow across the break room. A flicker of movement in the evidence room. I told myself it was fatigue. The fluorescent lights were old. They flickered all the time. My eyes were tired. That had to be it. But then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing just beyond the office doors. I called out, "Hello?" And the steps stopped. Not a pause exactly, but an unnatural silence, like the sound itself had been swallowed by the walls. I walked toward the noise, my hand resting on my flashlight. Nothing, just a long, empty hallway and the hum of the heat. I shook my head and returned to the files. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And then I realized why. The photographs, faces of the missing, men, women, children, some faded with age, some still crisp in memory. And I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Their eyes, not in the pictures themselves, though they all had that vacant stare, but in the corners of the office, on the walls, behind glass. I started seeing them reflected where they couldn't have been, a pair of eyes in the darkened hallway, a silhouette in the evidence room, the faint outline of someone standing just beyond the door to the storage closet. I stopped pretending. I stopped rationalizing. I grabbed my flashlight and walked the station, systematically checking every hallway, every room. But each time I entered a room, it was empty, no one there, yet the feeling didn't leave. And sometimes, just as I moved to the next room, I would catch a flicker in the corner of my eye, a person standing still, then gone when I turned fully. It dawned on me slowly, like ice melting across my skin. Some of the missing weren't gone. Not really, not fully. I could feel in the air a weight pressing down, the way the shadows clung too close, how the walls seemed to shift subtly when I wasn't looking. I started testing it, opening doors slowly, listening for sounds, whispers, breaths that weren't mine, footsteps circling the empty corridors. I stopped checking files. The names were irrelevant now. I knew they were here. Somewhere. Waiting. The feeling intensified near the evidence room. I opened the door, the flashlight cutting through the thick darkness, and froze. A figure was standing in the far corner, head down, motionless. I thought it was a deputy I'd seen years ago, someone from the files, but their uniform was faded, torn in places, soaked like they had been in water for days. I called out. No response. I stepped closer. The figure didn't move. And then it did. Not a sudden motion, not a human reaction, but a slow, deliberate turn toward me. The face, it was hollow, almost melted. Features stretching in ways that shouldn't be possible. Eyes fixed on me. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The figure didn't step forward. It didn't move at all, but I could feel it. I could feel it trying to reach me. I ran, down the hall, past the offices, past the evidence room. The footsteps followed me now. Not my own, not mine alone. They circled, slow, relentless. I reached the break room, slammed the door, and leaned against it, shaking. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing in a way that sounded almost like laughter. And that's when I realized the station wasn't just haunted. It was alive, or something in it was. It remembered the missing. It remembered the shift, and it held them, not just in memory, not just in stories, but here, present, trapped, existing in the edges of my vision, in the walls, and the reflections in the shadows. I could hear them then, low, muffled, like a crowd of people pressing against the walls just out of sight. Not screams, not voices, just a collective murmur of their existence, as if the station itself had swallowed them and refused to let go. I pressed my face against the break room window. Empty parking lot. No one. But I could hear them, clearly now, moving through the walls, circling the halls, waiting for someone else to notice. I tried the radios. Nothing. The phones? Dead. Even the old intercom didn't work. I was alone with them. Alone and yet surrounded. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time didn't feel linear anymore. The station stretched and shrank. Corridors extending impossibly. Doors leading to rooms I hadn't opened before. I found myself in places that should not exist. Storage closets that were bigger inside than they were outside. Offices that looped back into the same hallways. And always that presence. Watching. Waiting. I stopped trying to escape. Every door I opened led me deeper. Every hallway curved just enough to confuse my sense of direction. And in the quietest corners of the station, I began to see them more clearly. Shadows that detached from the walls, forming into vague human shapes. Faces pressed into glass. Outlines of bodies standing silently, waiting. I didn't recognize all of them. Some were new, some old. Some faces I'd studied in the files. They were all here, trapped between walls and reflections, a liminal purgatory. And then I understood why no one had ever explained the disappearances. It wasn't something that happened outside the station. It happened here. People vanished. Not into the night, not into the woods, not into the rivers or highways. They vanished into building itself. Slowly, imperceptibly, until the station became both their prison and their grave. I don't know how long I wandered those hallways. I lost track of everything. Shadows lengthened and shortened in ways that didn't make sense. Doors opened and closed on their own. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth, rusted metal, and something human. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see one of them. A missing deputy, a lost traveler, a child taken from a lonely home. And often I did, standing just at the edge of my vision, retreating when I tried to look directly. I thought about leaving the station, about driving home, about abandoning the ship entirely. But when I approached the exit doors, the hallways behind me stretched further than they should. I ran, the doors receding, the light dimming, and I realized I was part of it now. Observed, cataloged, recorded. The shift never ended. The station never slept. And whatever had been waiting in the walls had no intention of letting me leave. The weight of it pressed on me, heavier than anything I've ever felt. Fatigue, fear, something older, something patient. I could hear the whispers again, soft, insistent, circling. The missing weren't gone. They weren't outside. They were here, waiting for someone to notice, to acknowledge, to join them in the endless corridors, the looping hallways, the halls that never ended. And I understood fully finally. This wasn't about ghosts. This wasn't about spirits or the dead. It was about the station itself. And if I stayed, if I lingered too long, I would join them, become part of its memory, part of its endless shift. I sank into the nearest chair, my flashlight trembling in my grip, listening to the low, undulating hum of the building, the whispers of the traffic, the faint creak of doors that were never there before. I had no plan, no hope, just awareness. And in that awareness, I felt the station breathe, and in its breath, the lost, the missing, the trapped, all waiting for the next shift, the next witness, the next soul to notice that some things never truly leave. The night stretched on. The files sat open on my desk. I stared at them, at the faces, at the empty eyes, and the station watched me back. Always, waiting, patient, eternal. And I understood then, with a sinking certainty, that this was only the beginning, because some shifts never end. The road was empty, not just empty in the usual way. No cars, no trucks, no headlights cut into the night, but a kind of empty that felt like it had swallowed the world whole. I had been driving this stretch for years, the same rural highway that twisted between fields and forests, the same dim orange glow of worn street lamps that barely reached the asphalt. Night shifts were always quiet, but tonight felt different. The fog rolled in thick, pressing against the edges of my windshield like a living thing. It clung to the trees, curling around the telephone poles, muffling the sound of my tires on the asphalt. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the gear shift, gripping it like it would keep me tethered to reality. The radio was off. The hum of the engine was my only company. Then I saw it. A car, just ahead, barely visible through the white-gray haze. Its taillights glowed faintly, red and steady, drifting along the curves of the road. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars on the highway at night weren't unusual. But the closer I got, the stranger it felt. The car moved like it didn't belong. It wasn't the speed. It matched the flow of traffic. But there was a sort of wrongness about it. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. My vision was clear. My fatigue wasn't bad. The fog outside pressed him harder. When I looked again, the car was gone. I jerked my head side to side, checking the lane and the shoulder. Nothing. No tire tracks in fog. No sign of lights behind the next bend. It was as if the car had simply vanished. I eased up on the accelerator, my pulse quickening, and scanned the road ahead. The fog thickened, visibility dropping to maybe 50 feet. I couldn't see the painted lines. I couldn't see the edges of the road, only the murky swirl of white press against the headlights. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Then I saw it again, the faint glow of taillights, drifting lazily just ahead. My chest tightened. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the car had moved closer, almost too close to the distance I traveled. But I hadn't passed any side roads. There was nowhere for it to have doubled back. I shook my head. Maybe fatigue. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. But the unease didn't go away. I kept my eyes on the car, noticing now the faint details. Its shape, the dull gleam of the paint, the license plate I couldn't quite read. There was no driver I could see. Just the car drifting along, always the same distance ahead of me, never moving away, never moving toward me. I tried to pass it. My foot nudged the gas pedal. I eased into the left lane, tires humming over the faded lines. The car remained ahead, perfectly aligned with me. Faster, slower, same speed. It wasn't trying to pass or avoid me. It wasn't driving at all in the sense that a car normally drives. It was there waiting. The fog closed in a wall of wet cold. The world outside, my headlights disappeared. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to pull onto the shoulder and wait it out. But curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, pressed me onward. I followed. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. Time had a hollow quality, stretched and soft. The car ahead glowed faintly in the fog, its taillights steady and almost warm against the chill. And then, just like that, it vanished. No slow fade, no blink, no soft fade into the fog. One moment it was there, the next nothing. My eyes darted around, scanning. There was nothing, just the empty highway, white fog pressing in on every side. The trees, the fences, the telephone poles, they were all swallowed. The road itself seemed to end a few feet ahead, yet the asphalt continued. I wasn't moving faster. It was like the world had paused and left me behind. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself. My hands trembled, and I gripped the wheel tighter. I took a deep breath and pressed forward. The fog seemed denser now, as though it knew I was watching, as though it had taken the car and hidden it just to unnerve me. Then I saw something moving in the fog to my left. A shadow, just barely visible, darting behind the trees. I blinked. Nothing. The movement wasn't consistent, not natural. It flitted, vanished, reappeared, always at the edge of vision, just out of reach. I tried to convince myself it was a deer. Could be a coyote. Could be nothing at all. But the hair on my arms rose, and the gnawing tension in my chest didn't let go. I focused on the road, eyes scanning, heartbeat hammering. The road stretched on endlessly, white and slick in fog, headlights barely cutting through the thick swirl. Then I caught it again. The car, ahead, or maybe the same car, maybe another. I couldn't tell. Its taillights glowed like embers in the fog, the license plate still unreadable, the shape vaguely familiar but wrong. Its movement was disjointed, like it existed in pieces, sometimes closer than it should have been, sometimes farther, sometimes perfectly still. I tried to call out. My voice came out rough, strained. Hello? Hey! Nothing. The fog swallowed the sound before it could reach the car. Panic began to creep in. I had to know, was there a driver? Was someone inside? I slowed, letting my tires hum over the road, straining to see inside. The fog made the glass opaque, but there was movement. Not inside, not like someone driving, but a flicker, a shadow shifting like it was aware of me, and then vanished. I clenched the wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. My foot hovered over brake. I wanted to stop. I wanted to turn around. But part of me, part of that stubborn, foolish curiosity, kept going. And then the most surreal thing happened. The road ahead twisted impossibly. A bend I knew was a slow left curve became sharper, tighter, more abrupt than it could physically be. The car ahead, whatever it was, drifted along the curve perfectly, hugging the inside lane, disappearing just before the fog swallowed it again. It wasn't following the rules of physics. It wasn't driving. It was moving, and I was following. I slowed further, adrenaline sharp in my veins. My eyes scanned, trying to find something rational. A side road, a place to pull off, a tree, a fence post. Nothing. Only the car, only the fog, only the eerie silence. The hum of my tires, the soft drone of the engine, and the occasional distant drip of water from leaves. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared again, the car was gone. No flicker, no fade, no trace at all. I stopped completely in the middle of the lane, engine idling, headlights cutting a pale tunnel through the fog. My pulse raced, breath came in short gasps. I scanned every shadow, every bend, every inch of the invisible road. Nothing. I wanted to laugh, to shake my head, to tell myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, nothing more than a trick of the fog. But deep down I knew something was here, something that shouldn't have been, something waiting on this stretch of highway, hidden in the white mist, moving just beyond the limits of sight. I pressed the accelerator slowly, carefully, keeping my eyes on the fog ahead. No more attempts to pass, no more guesses. Just moving, just trying to keep forward, trying to outrun the unease gnawing at my chest. But the road stretched endlessly. Every mile marker I passed seemed identical. The fields on either side blurred together. And every time I dared to glance in the rear view, I thought I saw something. A flash of red light where there shouldn't be one. A shadow shifting between the trees. But whenever I blinked or turned fully, nothing. I realized then that the road itself had changed. Not physically, maybe, but in some impossible, subtle way. The fog made everything uncertain. Every bend could be an illusion. Every shadow could hide something, or someone, and I was alone, except for the car that disappeared, the mist that pressed in, and the quiet knowledge that I was being watched by the unseen. Hours, maybe minutes passed. I can't be certain. Eventually, the fog thinned slightly, revealing the faint glow of distant lights. My pulse slowed, though only a little. The empty road stretched on, and the memory of that car, vanishing, impossibly near and then gone, stayed with me. I glanced in the mirror one last time. Nothing, only my reflection, pale and tired, and the dim glow of the headlights cutting through the receding fog. But I knew it wasn't gone. Not really. The highway had taken it back. The mist had swallowed it, waiting for the next traveler. And I, just another driver on the night shift, was left to remember the feeling of being followed, of being watched, and the road that never truly empties. The fog never truly lifted. Not really. It clung to the edges of the road like wet cloth, dampening sound and light until the world felt thin and unreal. I'd thought, when the car had vanished, that maybe it had just been a trick of my eyes. Fatigue, fog, paranoia. But when I continued driving, moving forward on instinct more than anything else, the faint glow of taillights appeared again, just ahead. They flickered, barely visible, like candle flames in the wind. Sometimes one side would flare brighter, then vanish entirely, leaving only a dull red hovering in the mist. My heart jumped every time, chest tight, and I gripped the steering wheel so hard it left impressions in my palms. I slowed, then sped up, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. At one moment, the lights were 50 yards ahead. A blink later, they seemed almost at the curve, impossibly close. My mind screamed that it couldn't be real, that physics didn't work this way. But my eyes told me otherwise. They were moving, following the road, but not like a normal car. Not like any car I'd ever driven behind. I tried to call out, my voice ragged from hours of driving. Hey, wait, stop. Nothing. No sound carried past the fog. I could hear only the thrum of my tires and the low hum of my engine. It was too quiet, too still, like the world had muted itself. And then as I turned a bend, the lights vanished entirely. Gone. No fade, no soft disappearance. They just weren't there anymore. My stomach dropped. I stopped the truck in the middle of the lane, engine idling. I leaned forward, squinting, trying to pierce the fog, willing the lights to appear again. My hands trembled. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. My pulse felt louder than the engine. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement again, faint, flickering on the side of the road. I swerved slightly instinctively, but when I looked fully, there was nothing, only the pale white of fog pressing against the darkness. I shook my head. I told myself it was exhaustion. It had to be. The night was long. I'd been driving hours, no traffic, no noise. Fatigue played tricks on the mind, especially when the world feels as empty as this. But then the lights reappeared. They flickered at first, small dots, almost hidden in the mist. Then they solidified, a dull red glow hovering ahead, not steady, not predictable. They'd pulse like a heartbeat. My pulse matched it without my consent. Thump, 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 and I could feel the tension coiling tighter in my chest. I tried to track them, keep a steady distance. But the moment I adjusted my speed, they would shift, closer, farther, sometimes disappearing entirely, then snapping back into view around a curve I knew I hadn't yet reached. It was as if the road itself was bending for them, twisting in impossible ways, while I drove straight. I remember the first time I'd driven this stretch, years ago, during daylight. No bend like this, no illusion of distance. And yet, here in the fog, the road didn't feel familiar anymore. Everything was uncertain. Trees leaned strangely, their branches almost reaching for the asphalt. Shadows moved just beyond my vision, and always the lights ahead, flickering, unpredictable. I considered stopping completely, pulling onto the shoulder, waiting, but there was a compulsion I couldn't explain, a need to follow, to see where this led. It wasn't curiosity, not entirely. It was fear, yes, but the kind that pushes forward, that makes you want to confront what shouldn't exist. The lights blinked again, a pulse, then gone. Then a moment later, reappearing closer, flickering rapidly like the car or whatever it was toying with me. My hands shook, not just from fear, but from adrenaline. I forced myself to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, trying to calm the racing mind. I try to focus on rational things. It could be another driver, lost in fog. It could be a car on a side road, reflection playing tricks on me. But no, the movements didn't make sense. They didn't follow the rules of physics. They weren't reacting to my driving. They were dictating it. As I followed, the fog thickened again, swallowing the edges of the road entirely. Headlights cut only a narrow tunnel forward. The flickering taillights were all I had to aim at, all I had to measure my progress. I dared not blink. Every moment I did, I feared they would vanish and leave me alone on the white nothing. Then, for the first time, I noticed a sound. A faint, almost imperceptible hum, like the low vibration of an engine under tension. But it didn't match mine. It wasn't a car engine. Not exactly. It was deeper, resonating, as if the fog itself vibrated with it. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel, and felt my skin prickle. I reached a stretch of road where the fog thinned slightly. For a brief second, I thought I saw the outline of the vehicle. Not just lights, but a shape. A car, yes, but somehow wrong. The edges didn't align. It seemed longer than it should be, the curves off, as if it existed partly in another dimension. And then, just like that, the fog swallowed it and it vanished again. I slammed my hands to the wheel, frustration and fear blending. My heart pounded. My mind raced with possibilities, animal, hallucination, something supernatural. None felt sufficient. None explained the way it moved, the way it vanished and returned, always controlling its distance from me. I drove faster. No, slower. Faster, slower. I tried to catch it, tried to lose it. Every change in speed was meaningless. The lights followed or vanished as they chose. I realized, with a sinking pit in my stomach, that I wasn't controlling anything. I was simply along for the ride. And then they flickered in a pattern. Not random this time, but deliberate. Flash, flash, pause. Flash, flash, pause. I counted it. Heartbeat matching the rhythm. It wasn't a language I understood, but it was communication. Some warning, some call, or maybe just amusement watching me panic. My breathing grew shallow. I had to remind myself to blink, to swallow, to move my foot off the brake and back to the gas. The road stretched ahead, white and unreal, a tunnel of mist and shadows. The flickering lights pulsed ahead, disappearing and reappearing, teasing me, leading me. I remember one moment in particular, a long straight stretch. Fog pressed on every side, silence, so complete it felt like the world had ended. The lights flickered and then they vanished. My eyes scanned, searching for any hint of their presence. And in the brief pause, I saw a shadow move across the asphalt, slender, low, and impossibly fast. Not a car, not an animal. Something else. Something that shouldn't exist. And in the next second, the lights reappeared, closer than they had ever been, and the shadow was gone. I swallowed hard and pressed on, though every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn back, to abandon the highway entirely. But the lights were all I could see, all I had to navigate. Without them, I feared the fog would swallow me completely. Time became meaningless. I had no idea how long I drove. Minutes? Hours? The rhythm of the taillights' flicker was the only measure of continuity, the only sign that the world existed outside the cab of my truck. Sometimes they appeared just ahead, sometimes farther down the road, sometimes vanishing entirely, only to snap back closer than logic should allow. The more I followed, the more I realized something terrifying. The road wasn't taking me anywhere. It was keeping me here, in this fog, under control of those flickering lights, in a place where distance and time had no meaning. And I knew I could never really catch it. It wasn't meant to be caught. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared that first time, the flickering stopped. The red dots merged into a steady, dull glow far down the fog road. Not flashing, not teasing, just waiting. I slowed, hesitated. My hands shook. My mind raced with every possible explanation, none of them comforting. And then I understood, in the pit of my stomach, it had been testing me. watching me, guiding me, and now it was waiting to see what I would do next. I pressed on. I hadn't expected the exit to be here. GPS hadn't mentioned it. There were no signs in advance, nothing on the map, and yet, as I rounded the bend, a narrow asphalt slip appeared to my right, lit faintly by the truck's headlights. The fog thinned just enough to reveal the cracked pavement and the guardrail curling along the edge. I slowed, instinct more than reason, every sense on alert. And that's when I saw it. A car off the road, partially over the gravel shoulder, one wheel dangling over the embankment. The driver's side door was open, headlights dead, engine silent. I froze. The world had shrunk to this single image, a frozen scene framed by the low-hanging fog. I expected movement, footsteps, a figure, anything, but there was nothing. The road ahead was empty, and the shoulder of the exit held only the abandoned car, silent, waiting. I swung the truck onto the shoulder slowly, tires crunching over gravel. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to leave, to keep driving, to pretend I'd seen nothing. But I was already halfway here. Curiosity, dread, some mixture I couldn't name, rooted me in place. The car looked ordinary at first, a mid-sized sedan, but there were signs that something had gone wrong. The front bumper was crushed, a smear of dirt and broken paint curling up the hood. One headlight hung loose, its glass cracked. The driver's door was open just enough to suggest someone had exited in a hurry, or had been pulled out. I stepped out of my truck, boots crunching over gravel, and approached carefully. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded hollow in the fog, swallowed immediately. No answer, not a whisper, not a cough, nothing. I walked closer, trying to see inside the car. Windows fogged over, streaked with condensation from the damp night. The interior smelled faintly of wet leather, car scent mixed with dust, and something else I couldn't identify. Something metallic, sharp, blood, maybe, or just the imagination running wild. The gravel near the wheels caught my attention. Footprints, a set leading away from the car toward the edge of the embankment, and then disappearing entirely. No further marks, no broken branches, nothing to suggest where whoever or whatever had gone. It was as if they had vanished into the fog itself. I froze, staring at the trail, mind struggling to make sense of it. My hand rested on the car, feeling the cold metal. The door was locked from the inside, the keys still in the ignition. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, and yet the footprint suggested no one had walked away. A low groan echoed somewhere down the highway, muffled by the fog. I whipped my head toward the sound, heart hammering. Maybe it was another car. Maybe it was the wind. But the highway behind me was empty. There were no other vehicles, no lights, just the fog, the empty road, and me. I circled the car slowly, boots scraping over gravel. Something about it felt wrong. Not just the accident, not just the vanishing footprints. There was an emptiness here, a stillness that pressed down on me, heavy and cold. It was a kind of silence that makes your own heartbeat deafening, that makes you doubt the world beyond your own senses. I leaned down, brushing gravel aside to inspect the footprints again. They were human, yes, but they weren't deep, as if the person walking had barely touched the ground. And they weren't consistent. Left foot, right foot, then a gap, then left again. An impossible rhythm, like a stutter in space. My stomach turned. I looked up at the road ahead, trying to see any hint of movement. Headlights of another car? Another set of tracks? Nothing. Just fog, curving asphalt, and the faint shadow of trees along the embankment. A sudden movement made me snap my head toward the tree lean. Something shifted there, barely perceptible. A shadow? A figure? My breath caught. It was gone before I could focus. Swallowed by the mist. My pulse raced. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a branch moving in the wind. But instinct screamed differently. I stepped back from the car, my mind racing. I had to decide, stay and investigate further, or leave and call it in. Part of me wanted to stay, to see, to confront this impossible scene. Another part wanted to flee, drive until the fog swallowed the world behind me. I glanced again at the footprints, then at the car, then at the embankment, disappearing into white nothing. And that's when I saw it. Faint drag marks leading from the door toward the edge of the slope. Something heavy, something that had been moved, or had moved itself. The ground was disturbed in a way that suggested struggle, effort. Yet there was no one there. No person, no animal, no figure of any kind. I swallowed hard, feeling the chill crawl up my spine. My hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from adrenaline and fear. The fog pressed closer, swirling around me in whispers I could almost hear. Voices that weren't really voices, shadows that weren't really shadows. I considered calling it in, radio the dispatch, but my throat tightened. What would I say? Car abandoned on foggy exit. No driver. Footprints vanish. They'd think I was imagining things, that I was tired. And yet, part of me wanted them to hear it, wanted someone else to see this. I walked along the edge of the embankment, scanning for anything. Clothing, personal items, even just a hint of where the person had gone. The fog made everything unreal. The trees seemed to lean in, bending in impossible ways. Shapes shifted in the mist. Every step I took felt like walking through some distorted memory, a place where rules of the real world no longer applied. I stopped abruptly. There it was, a shoe, half buried in gravel, one heel twisted at an odd angle. Not mine, not the driver's maybe. Someone else? Or the same? My mind refused clarity. I bent down, boots scraping gravel, fingers trembling as I touched the worn leather. Cold, damp, real. I looked back at the car. Still silent, still empty. The open door creaked slightly in the fog-blown wind. I almost jumped, almost turned and ran. But I stayed. I had to know. I had to see. Then I saw something inside the rear-view mirror of the sedan. Not a reflection of me. Something else. A face, pale, impossible to focus on, staring blankly through the fog glass. I blinked and it was gone. Nothing. Empty seat. I cursed under my breath, heart pounding, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. My curiosity was a chain I couldn't break. I walked to the driver's side, leaning slightly into the fog, peering inside. The seats were damp, fingerprints smeared across the upholstery. And then I noticed the back seat. Something moved there, just a hint of motion, the corner of a shadow. But when I leaned fully forward, nothing. Empty. I stumbled back, trying to make sense of it. The fog thickened again, curling around the car like smoke. A faint sound reached my ears, low and wet, like water dripping onto metal. I scanned the ground, hard in my throat. Nothing. Then it hit me. The smell, something earthy, musky, iron-tinged. Blood? I swallowed hard, looking around. Nothing. No one. Nothing that could explain the odor except the impossible thought creeping into my mind, that whatever had been here had never left. I stepped back, glancing once more at the trail leading to the embankment. Empty. Vanished. And I realized with a sinking certainty, the person, the driver, or whatever had been here, had been taken, or had left in a way that the world didn't allow. And whatever it was, it could still be nearby, just beyond my sight, watching. The fog pressed against me like a wall, and I felt utterly exposed. I returned to my truck, hands shaking, boots scraping gravel. The exit stretched behind me, empty, silent, waiting. I started the engine, lights cutting through the mist again. The abandoned car remained in the rearview mirror, quiet, still, and impossibly wrong. I kept driving, keeping the car in sight until it finally vanished into fog as if it had never existed. But the unease remained, crawling up my spine, pressing into my mind with every mile. I realized then that some exits weren't meant to be taken. Some accidents weren't just accidents. And some roads held on to their passengers, long after they thought they had escaped. I didn't look back again. Not until much later, miles down the fog highway, did I allow myself to blink and breathe again. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something from that abandoned exit had followed, lingering in periphery, waiting for me to notice. The road was empty, or at least it looked that way in the headlights. The fog had thinned slightly, but the world outside the windshield still seemed unreal, stretched and softened, like I was driving through a dream someone else had painted. My hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles white, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror almost reflexively, a sense of unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker, a shadow that darted across the mirror, subtle, almost like my reflection had caught in the wrong light. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and it was gone. My heart stuttered. That quick, hot panic that comes when you realize something is wrong, but you can't yet name it. I shook my head and told myself I was tired. I'd been driving long stretches, fog and monotony playing tricks on my mind, but the feeling didn't leave. The mirror seemed to pull at me, a dark window into something just outside the reach of reality. Another flicker, this time more distinct. A figure, tall, thin, standing in the lane behind me, or at least that's where the mirror said it was. But when I swerved my gaze fully over my shoulder, the lane was empty. Nothing, just asphalt and fog. I forced a laugh out of my throat, bitter and hollow. "You're imagining it," I muttered, but the sound of my own voice did little to calm the unease curling inside me. I started driving faster, headlights cutting through the fog like knives. I kept checking the mirror every time the figures appeared. Sometimes there were two, sometimes three, moving closer, or at least seeming to. But every time I looked back over my shoulder, nothing. Just the empty road stretching into the distance, silent and indifferent. I felt my stomach twist. My mind tried to rationalize it. Shadows from trees, reflections from my dashboard, fatigue, imagination. I told myself all of it, but my gut told me the truth. Something was there, watching, waiting. I glanced back again, and the image froze me in place. A man, or something shaped like a man, stood perfectly still, staring directly at me through the mirror. His face was blank, pale, features indistinct, but unervingly human. The headlights didn't touch him, didn't illuminate him. He was there only in the mirror, impossibly clear, impossibly wrong. I jerked my eyes away, heart hammering, and swerved slightly. The tires scraped gravel from the shoulder, the truck groaning beneath me. I cursed under my breath. Focus. Focus on the road. Don't look back. But I couldn't stop. Not entirely. Another flicker, another figure. This one smaller, hunched, moving as if stepping lightly over an invisible surface. It glided closer, and then, as soon as I tried to focus, it was gone. My pulse roared in my ears. My breath came fast, shallow, my hands gripping the wheels so tight my nails dug into my palms. I forced myself to take deep, slow breaths, trying to remember the basics. Eyes on the road, hands on the wheel. Nothing out there could hurt me. Nothing, I kept telling myself, trying to will the rational mind to stay in control. But the mirror had a pull all its own, and I found myself glancing again. This time, I saw a movement in the very back seat. I slammed my eyes shut, convinced I was imagining it, that sleep deprivation had finally won. When I opened them again, nothing. Empty seats. Just the truck's upholstery, damp from the night, quiet and still. But the feeling remained that there had been someone or something inside, watching me. I drove faster. Headlights bounced off the fog in erratic patterns. Shadows that twisted and shifted at the edge of vision. And every time I glanced at the mirror, the figures were closer. They didn't run or walk. They didn't move naturally. They just existed, floating in a space I couldn't see except through that glass. I remembered the abandoned exit, the car with no driver, the footprints leading into nothing. A shiver ran down my spine. I had thought that was a singular, isolated incident, but now, looking into the rearview mirror, I realized the world had its own logic here. The rules I knew didn't apply. There were spaces, gaps between moments, where things waited, things that weren't meant to be seen. A sudden sound, a faint tapping, made me flinch. I looked around. The truck's cab was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the tires on asphalt. I told myself it was gravel from the shoulder or a branch scratching against the undercarriage. But then, again, the tapping, quicker this time, coming from behind. From the mirror, I dared a glance. Two figures now. One at the rear, one closer to the side window. Shapes barely human, but entirely present in my reflection. And then I saw their faces. Not detailed faces. Not like mine, not like anyone I knew. Just hollow voids where eyes should be, mouthless expressions, blank and impossibly patient. They didn't scream. They didn't lunge. They just stared, unblinking, from that impossible dimension in the mirror. I swallowed hard, trying to focus, trying to think. I considered stopping the truck, leaving it running and stepping outside. But my body felt like lead. My hands, my legs, even my lungs refused to cooperate fully. I could barely lift my foot from the gas pedal. Then the figures moved again, subtly closer, but not approaching as we normally approach. They edged forward in the mirror, maintaining a distance, never entering the cab in reality, only appearing in that reflection. I realized with a sinking dread that the mirror wasn't just showing me behind me. It was showing me something else entirely, a space overlapping my world, populated by these impossible, silent watchers. I closed my eyes for a moment, praying it would vanish when I opened them. When I did, the mirror reflected only the foggy road and my own haggard face. Relief hit, but it was shallow, temporary. I knew they hadn't gone. They had only withdrawn, paused, biding their time, waiting. I forced myself to speak aloud, voice trembling. I see you. I know you're there. You're not real. The words sounded weak even to me. I didn't know if they were meant for the figures or for myself. The world felt thinner, the fog denser, as if the distance between reality and nightmare had shrunk to the width of my rear-view mirror. The next few miles passed in a blur of reflexive glances and tight grips on the wheel. I tried to rationalize, tried to convince myself it was fatigue, imagination, residual adrenaline from the abandoned exit. But I couldn't stop looking. The pull of that glass was too strong. And every time I did, a figure flickered, almost like static in an old television. The static resolved into shapes that were human, but not entirely, staring at me, tracking me, waiting. At one point, I thought I saw one reach toward me, arms stretching impossibly long, fingers thin and crooked, brushing against the window in the mirror. I jerked my head back. Nothing, just the fog, the trees, and my own frantic heartbeat. I realized, somewhere deep down, that this was no ordinary night. There was a pattern to the disappearances, the abandoned exits, the fog, the mirrors. Something had claimed space here, twisted it, bent it, and left its marks in the shadows just outside my perception. I had glimpsed one small piece of it, and now the mirrors were trying to show me more. I drove on, sweat cooling in the chill of the night, gripping the wheel until my fingers ached. Every mile felt endless, every curve a trap. I avoided looking back for longer stretches, forcing my gaze on the road. But even peripheral vision betrayed me. Shapes lingered at the edges, movements that should not have been possible. By the time the fog finally thinned completely, and I emerged onto a stretch of open highway, I felt raw, hollowed out. My hands were sore, my mind frayed, but the figures had stopped appearing. Or maybe I had just stopped seeing them. I didn't know if I had outrun them, or if they had simply retreated for now. The mirror reflected only the night, my own weary face, and the road behind me, stretching into nothing. But I knew I would see them again. I would see them every time I looked back. Somewhere in that fog, in that abandoned stretch of road, they had learned my face, and I had learned theirs. And the knowledge, like a stone in my chest, would stay with me. Even now, hours later, I catch myself glancing at mirrors, at windows, at anything reflective, and I feel it, the same impossible pull, the same impossible awareness. Rear view eyes, watching, waiting, reminding me that the road never truly empties. I was alone on the highway, the kind of long stretch where the road disappears into nothing, and the lines painted on the asphalt seem more like suggestions and rules. The fog had rolled in heavy, a thick, pale curtain that swallowed headlights and muffled sound. It was a kind of night where time doesn't flow normally, where minutes stretch and compress, and the world feels like it exists only in the narrow strip in front of your windshield. I'd been driving for hours, my rig hummed beneath me, the engine a constant, familiar vibration. Normally I like these nights. Quiet, empty roads, the world reduced to the steady rhythm of tires on pavement. But tonight was different. Tonight, the fog wasn't just mist. It was thick, almost sentient, crawling up from the ditches and hugging the pavement like it had weight, like it wanted to keep me inside it. The mile markers came up first, one after the other, flickering in the fog. 77, 77, 77. My eyes narrowed. I'd driven this stretch countless times, and I remember the numbers changing, advancing normally one after the other. But not tonight. Tonight. The markers repeated, as if the road itself had looped back on itself. 77 again. And again. I swallowed hard. I checked my GPS. The dot representing my truck moved steadily, but the numbers on the road did not match the distance. Time itself felt wrong. I could feel in the way the fog pressed against the windshield, and the faint chill crawling up my arms. Every passing marker looked the same. Same number. Same faded paint. Same tiny dents from who knows how many years of wind and rain. I thought about stopping. Step out, take a look. But the fog was everywhere. You couldn't see the shoulder, couldn't see the ditch, couldn't see much beyond a few yards ahead. It was like driving through milk, and the thought of leaving the truck, it didn't feel safe. Something about this fog made the world feel hollow, like the real edges of things had been erased. A sound broke the hum of the engine, something soft, scraping against metal. I tensed, heart racing. I looked around the cab. Nothing. The fog made the world silent, but the sound lingered in my mind. I told myself it was a branch hitting the side mirror or some debris from the shoulder, but it didn't feel right. My gut nodded with unease. I glanced at the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a dark shape at the edge of the fog behind me. My pulse spiked. I blinked, and it was gone. Just the endless gray haze stretching back. No headlights, no shape, nothing. The markers repeated again. 77, 77, 77. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the markers had been replaced incorrectly. Maybe some contractor screwed up and painted the wrong numbers. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something was wrong here. Something about this stretch of highway had shifted, distorted. I adjusted the mirrors, tried to clear my thoughts, told myself I was tired. Hours of driving can do strange things to the mind. Make your eyes see shapes that aren't there, make the heart race at shadows. But the feeling persisted. Heavy, pressing, like the fog itself was leaning into the cab, breathing around me. I slowed slightly, trying to see further ahead, my headlights cutting a narrow path through the white. I reached mile marker 77 again. I couldn't have driven a mile and a half already. I knew the spacing too well. And yet here it was, exact same number, exact same wear, exact same dents and scratches. I shivered, rolling my shoulders to shake off the cold creeping under my jacket. The silence was thick, but then I heard it. A faint tapping, like something small striking metal. Maybe a deer, maybe a branch. I scanned the fog, but all I could see was that pale gray nothingness. I hunched over the wheel, tension rolling down my spine. I felt like I was being watched, though I knew logically the highway was empty. The fog obscured everything. I remember the story a fellow trucker told me once, about a stretch of road up north where the fog swallowed drivers whole, or at least made them disappear for hours. People would report the same number on markers over and over, mile after mile. I'd laugh back then. Stories to pass the night. Ghost stories. But now, with the fog pressing on all sides, my own breath visible in the cab, the hum of the engine suddenly loud and intrusive, I wasn't laughing. Another sound, closer this time. A scrape, sharp. My hands went cold on the wheel. I caught myself staring at the fog outside the side window, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. Nothing, only the soft, wet hiss of fog brushing the truck's metal. And then I noticed it in the rear view mirror. Not a person, not really, but a shape, dark, thin, standing or hovering in a way that made no sense. I jerked my eyes back to the road. My heart was hammering in my chest, a panic rhythm that made it hard to breathe. When I looked again, nothing, just fog. The mile markers repeated again. 77. I drove past slowly, stomach twisting. I tried to force logic into my mind. Maybe it was a trick of the fog, reflections of my own headlights bouncing back strangely. Maybe fatigue, had finally taken me over. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this road was different tonight, that something had been waiting here, just out of reach, watching the headlights carve a path through the gray. I glanced at the mirrors again, and the shape flickered. I couldn't tell if it moved toward me or if I had just imagined it stepping closer. It felt alive, intentional. My knuckles went white on the wheel. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing even. I forced myself to focus on the road ahead. The markers, the tires on asphalt, but the markers kept repeating. The same number. I tried to count them aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 77, 77, 77. My voice sounded weak, like the fog was swallowing even sound. Time distorted further. Minutes passed and collapsed into seconds. Each repetition of 77 felt heavier, oppressive. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't moving forward at all, that the world outside the cab had stopped frozen. But I was still trapped in the loop. The shape in the mirror appeared again. This time, I thought I could make out a face. Not detailed, not human, but a suggestion of eyes, of a mouth. It vanished the instant I blinked, leaving only my reflection staring back at me. My stomach churned. I clenched my jaw, trying to force calm. Keep driving. Keep going. Don't stop. I passed the same marker again. 77. I could hear my own heartbeat in the cab, loud and uneven. My hand shook slightly. I had no idea how long I'd been driving. Minutes? Hours? The fog had erased all sense of time, and the road repeated endlessly in both directions. And then I realized something else. The world outside had stopped responding to me. No wildlife, no distant lights, no other cars, only fog and asphalt. It was a corridor, a tunnel that looped infinitely, and I was trapped inside it. I tried to remember the last real thing I saw before the fog thickened. A farmhouse, a tree line, another truck. Nothing came to mind, only this stretch of road, repeating, folding in on itself. My stomach twisted again. I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out slowly, trying to anchor myself, try to stay grounded. Logical, rational, but logic was thin here, fragile. And that shape, flickering in the mirror, was not a product of fatigue. I felt it as clearly as I felt the wheel in my hands. Alive, waiting, patient. I didn't know how long I drove after that, only that I couldn't stop, couldn't get out of the fog. The markers repeated, 77 over and over, each one a pulse in the rhythm of something I didn't understand. I felt myself slipping, mind twisting with the road, the fog, the impossible repetition. Finally, miles, I think. Later, the fog thinned slightly. I could see the outlines of trees. The asphalt had texture again. The markers changed. 78, my pulse slowed slightly. Relief and dread mixed together. I had made it past whatever this stretch had been, but the memory of repeating 77 would stay with me, and the shape in the mirror, it would stay with me too. Even now, when I drive late at night on empty roads, I see it sometimes, in mirrors and reflections, just at the edge of my vision, and I know that road, that fog, that endless loop is still out there, waiting for the next driver, the next set of headlights to vanish into the mist. I kept driving, the fog clinging to the cab like a damp blanket. Mile markers finally moved past 77, finally climbed into 78, and I felt my chest unclench just a little. My eyes stayed glued to the road ahead, but something had shifted. Some part of the night that was watching me hadn't gone away. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was another trucker, a shadow slipping along the shoulder, walking against a line of the fog, moving at a slow, deliberate pace. My stomach flipped. It shouldn't have been there. The road was empty. Not a single other set of headlights. Not a trace of any vehicle passing through this stretch. And yet, there it was, tall and thin, walking like it had a destination that I couldn't see. I slowed, my rig's engine humming louder than usual, my hands tight on the wheel. I squinted through the fog, trying to see anything recognizable. Its face, its features, anything human. But the fog played tricks, curling around the figure like smoke, hiding it, making it blur. I thought maybe it was a lost traveler, someone who wandered off the road, but something about the way it moved, it wasn't normal. I called out, my voice hoarse in the cab. "Hey, You okay?" My words vanished in the fog, swallowed immediately. No response. Of course there was no response. It never moved faster or slower, just walked steadily, methodically, keeping pace with the fog in the shoulder. I hit the brakes, letting the rig slow to a crawl. Every instinct screamed to get closer, to figure out what I was seeing, and yet my gut churned. Something didn't want me to see it. Something didn't want me to approach. I rolled the window down a crack, letting the cold, damp air creep into the cab. The smell of wet asphalt and pine mixed with the fog, but there was another odor, faint but unmistakable. Something metallic, coppery, sharp. My stomach tightened. I told myself I was imagining it, that the night was playing tricks on me, but my nose knew better. I eased forward, keeping the figure in sight through the windshield. Every time I blinked, I half expected it to vanish, but it didn't, until it did. I drew closer, slower now, careful. My rig groaned as I shifted gears. The tires whispered over the wet asphalt, and then I was upon the spot where I'd seen the figure, and the shoulder was empty, completely, utterly empty. No footprints, no tracks in the wet gravel, nothing. The fog curled around the trees, hiding everything beyond 20 feet, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck rise. My chest tightened. Something about the empty shoulder, about the way the fog rolled in and around me, didn't feel empty at all. It felt like the night itself was holding its breath. I tapped the horn, a short, sharp beep, and the sound echoed through the mist, long and distorted. No response, no movement, just a sound fading into nothing. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the mind, a trick of the fog, but I knew better. Something had been there, and it had been watching me. I drove on, faster now, hands tight on the wheel. The markers ticked by, 78, 79, 80, but the feeling of being followed didn't leave. Shadows flitted at the edge of my vision, shapes bending and twisting with the fog. I blinked, and they were gone. My pulse thumped to my ears. Then I saw it again, a figure, same height, same thin outline, walking along the shoulder. My stomach dropped. I slowed instinctively, my rig rolling like a massive beast through the fog. My hand shook on the wheel, and I found myself whispering, "No, no, not again." It didn't run, didn't look up, just kept walking. And this time, I could see it more clearly, enough to know it wasn't human. Not quite. Its movements were too smooth, too deliberate, like a puppet guided by something beyond my understanding. Its head tilted slightly, tracking me, even though it had no eyes I could see. I took a deep breath, tried to convince myself to stop the truck, to roll down the window and get a better look. I wanted proof. I wanted to know what this was, but my gut twisted in fear, telling me to keep going, to leave it behind. I followed it, keeping a safe distance, eyes wide and heart pounding. And every time I tried to get closer, every time I leaned forward to see more, the figure would vanish, just disappear into the fog, leaving only the wet shoulder behind. No tracks, no disturbance, nothing to show it had been there at all. I slammed a hand against the horn. The sound shattered the silence, bouncing off the trees in the fog like a warning. The figure didn't reappear, only emptiness. I kept driving. Miles passed, maybe hours, maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. Time had lost its meaning on this stretch. The fog seemed thicker now, almost oppressive. My headlights barely cut through it. The edge of the beam blurred and shifting, like it didn't want to illuminate the world ahead. I kept checking the mirrors. Nothing, but I knew it hadn't gone. I could feel its presence at the edge of my awareness, a creeping pressure, like the world behind me had condensed into a single living shadow. The markers changed again, 81, 82, 83, but the feeling of being stalked persisted. I told myself stories to keep sane. Maybe someone else driving along, another lost traveler, maybe a reflection, maybe I was hallucinating from fatigue. But even as I reasoned it, the hair on my arms and neck remained raised, the cold sweat clinging to my collar, and the pressure in the air refused to release. I caught movement again, a figure walking parallel to my truck, shoulder to shoulder, just beyond the beam of my headlights. I froze, every nerve of my body screaming. Its shape shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt, and I saw for a brief, terrifying moment that its legs moved in a way I had never seen human legs move. Smooth, fluid, unbroken by joints. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I felt rooted in place, my hands frozen on the wheel. And then, just like before, it vanished. No footprints, no sound, nothing left behind. Only the fog rolling in over the shoulder, as if it had swallowed the figure whole. I whispered to myself, "It can't be real, it can't." But the rational mind faltered under the weight of fear. The fog was alive tonight. The highway was alive. And something had chosen to walk beside me. I slowed, even more careful, hesitant, trying to catch another glimpse. But the figure did not return. Instead, the silence pressed in. The hum of the engine sounded louder than before, the tires whispering over the asphalt like they were keeping secrets. My pulse throbbed in my ears. And then, in a moment that froze my blood, I saw another shadow, not on the shoulder, not walking, standing in the trees, just beyond the fog, tall, thin, impossibly still, staring at me. My headlights didn't reach it, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and accusing. The air vibrated with its presence. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel with shaking hands. My stomach turned. I wanted to turn around, drive back, escape, but there was no back. The road stretched infinitely, looping through fog and darkness. Each mile felt heavier, each repetition of markers like a drumbeat counting down. I drove faster, desperate, headlights slicing through the fog, trying to outrun what I could not name. But it didn't matter. The feeling of being followed, of being watched, was stitched into the night, into the air, into the asphalt beneath the tires. I don't know how long I drove. Hours? Minutes? The markers blurred together, numbers and names running into one another. 83, 84, 85. I lost count, and the figure never returned, at least not visibly, but its presence remained, lingering, waiting. Finally, I passed a bend, and the fog thinned slightly. The shadows didn't vanish, but they receded, like tide water pulling back into the dark. The highway stretched on, normal again, or at least as normal as it could feel after what I had just witnessed. I pulled off at the next rest stop, hand shaking on the wheel, chest heaving, trying to catch my breath. I stared into the foggy darkness beyond the lights, half expecting to see it again, but there was nothing, just the ordinary night, quiet and still. And yet I knew I would see it again, that shadow on the shoulder, walking beside the highway, vanishing when approached. It would follow me through memory, through dreams, through every stretch of road I drove alone in the night. And I would never know where it came from or why it followed. Some roads are not meant to be traveled alone. Some fogs are alive. And some shadows do not want to be seen. They just want to walk beside you, for however long you remain in their world. The fog had barely lifted when the first sound reached me. At first, I thought it was a truck in the distance, a long, low horn echoing over the empty asphalt. My rig's headlights barely cut through the mist, but the road ahead looked empty. No other vehicles, no flicker of lights, nothing. Still, the sound persisted, low and mournful, bouncing off the trees like it was coming from everywhere at once. I slowed, my tires whispering over the wet pavement, ears straining. The sound, it wasn't mechanical. It didn't have the weight of a diesel horn. It didn't roll through the air with a familiar rhythm. It was sharp, irregular, like someone had struck a car horn, then another, then a third, from somewhere I couldn't see, somewhere that shouldn't exist. I called out, my voice hoarse and barely audible over the faint howl of the wind. "Hello? Anyone there?" The sound of my own words seemed unreal, swallowed instantly by the fog. Nothing answered. Only the horns continued, soft, distant, and then closer. A strange pattern, as though someone or something was following me, guiding me, taunting me. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my chest. Maybe it was an echo. Maybe the fog was bending sound in ways my mind couldn't comprehend. But then it changed. The horns came from multiple directions at once, a chorus of impossible tones. One seemed behind me, then to the left, then off in the woods where the trees leaned over the shoulder like silent sentinels. I froze, hands gripping the wheel, staring into the fog. My rig felt too loud, too bright, too real against the shifting, unreal sound surrounding me. And then I understood I was alone. Absolutely alone. I tried to convince myself it was the woods, the way fog curls around the trunks and distorts sound. Maybe a deer had triggered a hunter's truck, or some long-forgotten farm equipment, left near the edge of the road. Reasoning didn't help. The horns didn't match anything I'd ever heard before. Long, low, distant, but with no source, no reflection, no other lights. I pressed forward, each mile marker creeping past in slow increments. My heartbeat was loud enough that I could feel it vibrating through the cab. 78, 79, 80, and still the horns followed, faint, teasing, echoing in the hollow spaces of the trees. They weren't constant. They came and went like someone breathing behind a mask or an animal hunting silently. I leaned out the window slightly, letting the damp air sting my face, hoping for any clue. The smell was just wet asphalt, wet pine, and a faint hint of something metallic, coppery. My stomach knotted. I swallowed hard and kept driving, eyes darting side to side, trying to pinpoint the source. It wasn't possible. Every time I thought I knew where it came from, the sound would shift, like a shadow moving just beyond my vision. Minutes passed, or was it hours? Time was fluid here, stretched and warped by fog and fear. I noticed the horns were changing. Longer, lower now, more insistent, vibrating through the air like they were calling my name. Not words, not even language, but a summons. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white, tried to shake the sensation crawling up my spine. My rig's headlights barely touched the trees, the fog swallowing everything else. Then it happened. The horn sounded so close, so piercing, that I flinched violently. My heart slammed against my ribs. I jerked the wheel instinctively, and the rig wobbled slightly. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching over the slick road, and leaned forward, scanning the fog with frantic eyes. Nothing. No other car, no figure, no source. Just mist curling through the shoulder like smoke, twisting around the trees that I tried to reason with myself. Could it be my imagination? Fatigue, the monotony of the road, the endless markers, the empty miles stretching behind me? But it was too real. My ears rang from a horn, the vibration still lingering in the cab. Something was there. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that knew I could hear it and yet refused to show itself. I pressed the accelerator again, heart still hammering. The horns didn't stop. They followed, fading and returning, soft, sharp, hollow. I could feel them bouncing off the trees, twisting through the fog. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow gliding between the trunks, following the rhythm of the horns. I blinked and it vanished. The air seemed denser now, thicker, every breath tasting of wet iron and fear. I called dispatch on the radio, my voice shaking. Unit 12, do you copy? I'm seeing shadows. Sounds horns. I'm alone on Route 77. Only static answered. The horn sound seemed to merge with the crackle of my radio, echoing in impossible harmony. My pulse thudded painfully in my ears. I forced myself to focus, scanning the road ahead, trying to maintain control of the rig. The horns became a low, mournful wail, like a chorus of warning signals, vibrating through the fog. It wasn't just sound anymore. It felt alive, pressing against my chest, against my skull, shaping the night itself around me. I remembered the stories from other drivers, tales of Route 77 at night, lost travelers, people vanishing into the fog. They had called it haunted, cursed. I'd never believed, but now I could feel it. The horns weren't mechanical. They weren't human. They were something else, something that existed just beyond perception, waiting, watching, marking me. The rig jolted as I tried to steer through a particularly thick patch of fog. The headlights flickered, briefly illuminating shapes at the edges of the shoulder, tall, thin, indistinct. I blinked and they were gone. The horns followed, echoing closer, like they were pressing into the glass, vibrating through the cab. My throat was dry, my hands trembling. I tried talking aloud to myself. It's just fog. It's just shadows. Just fog. The words fell hollow, a fragile shield against impossible sounds surrounding me. But I couldn't escape the feeling that something was moving with the horns, something pacing, circling. invisible yet present. I slowed again, too afraid to drive fast. The fog thickened, swallowing my headlights entirely. The horn softened, almost teasing now, a rhythm that invited me to stop, to look closer, to get out. And for a terrifying moment, I considered it, to step out of the cab, to see what was there, to face whatever followed me. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I gripped the wheel, breathed shallow, and pushed forward. Mile markers passed slowly, 81, 82, 83, and the horns began to fade, stretching into the distance, echoing into nothing. I didn't slow until I reached a rest stop, parking under the dim lights, shaking, exhausted, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I stepped out of the rig, my boots crunching on wet gravel. The fog hung low, thick and silver, curling through the trees. The horn sounds had gone, leaving only a ringing in my ears. I scanned the horizon. Nothing. No road. No shadow, no figure. Just the empty fog and the smell of wet earth and pine. I leaned against the cab, heart still racing. My chest felt tight, my throat raw. The night was quiet again, but I knew better. I knew the horns hadn't stopped. They were waiting. Somewhere out there in the fog, in the loops of highway, in the dark stretches where no one else dared to drive, they waited. And the next time I drove alone, they would return. Calling, marking, echoing, pressing into the night. I climbed back into the rig, hands still trembling, and started the engine. The fog was lighter now, but every shadow at the edge of my headlights seemed too tall, too deliberate. The road stretched ahead, empty, silent. But I knew the horns were still there, beyond the mist, waiting for me to listen, waiting for me to hear. Some roads have ghosts you cannot see. Some nights have sounds you cannot name. And on Route 77, in the middle of the night, the horns never sleep. I didn't see him at first. It was just another stretch of highway, dark, empty, wet from the last drizzle. The kind of night where your headlights feel like pinpricks in a void. But then I noticed him, standing on the shoulder just beyond the guardrail. A man, maybe a woman. I couldn't tell in the dim light. Hunched over slightly, back to the road, looking out into the woods. I slowed, instinctively, more out of caution than anything else. You see, I'm not the kind to pick up hitchhikers at night. Not on this road. Not alone. But something tugged at me. A sense that I should stop, that I should see if they were okay. I pulled closer, tires crunching on the gravel. My headlights flicked across the figure, illuminating him for a brief second. I leaned forward, squinting. His clothes were dark, blending with the shadows. The air felt heavier here, denser, as though the fog had thickened specifically around this spot. I called out softly, my voice bouncing off the guardrail in the trees. "Hey, you need help?" No answer. Only the sound of the wind weaving through the guardrail posts, a low, whispering hiss. I slowed to a crawl. Part of me told me to turn around, to leave him there. Part of me was already stepping out, the floor of my truck cold under my boots, fog curling around my ankles. But when I stepped on the brake, that's when it happened. He wasn't there. Not a shadow, not a movement, not a hint of a form behind the guardrail. My eyes scanned frantically. The shoulder, the drop into the shallow ditch, the trees beyond. They were empty, only the guardrail, slick with rain and the endless darkness. I rubbed my eyes, shaking my head, blaming the fog, the tiredness, the road. But then I saw it. Tire tracks. 2 parallel lines, pressed into the gravel, leading up to where it stood, and then disappearing straight into the earth. The gravel was undisturbed after that. No footprints, no sign of struggle, nothing. As if someone or something had simply stepped out of the world. I felt my stomach twist. I climbed back into the cab, heart hammering. I looked over my shoulder, peering down the shoulder where the tracks had vanished. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, only the trees, silent and tall, and the highway stretching endlessly in either direction. I tried to convince myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the tracks led into the soft mud beyond the ditch. Maybe he had ducked under the guardrail, hidden, waited for me to pass. But something about the emptiness, the suddenness, it felt wrong. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands, and decided to keep moving. As I pulled back onto the road, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Something unseen, just beyond the edge of the headlights, brushing against my peripheral vision. The hairs on my neck stood at attention. The horn sounds from earlier came to mind. Not now, thankfully, but their memory made the hair on my arms prick. The road was silent, but heavy, oppressive. Every mile marker I passed seemed wrong. They blurred into one another, indistinct, like the world itself had folded. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The shoulder was empty. The trees were empty. The guardrail stretched on, uninterrupted. The tracks that had appeared to vanish into nothingness were gone. Gravel smooth, untouched. It was as though the figure had never been there at all. But I knew better. I had seen him. I had seen him standing there, leaning against the cold metal, still and silent, waiting. And then, gone. I drove on in silence, the cab feeling smaller and more confining. The road curved slightly, and my headlights caught the slick surface, reflecting the dim light back at me. That reflection, it looked off, shimmering, almost like the air itself was bending. I squinted. Was it my mind playing tricks? Exhaustion catching up with me? I didn't want to stop to find out. Still, my eyes kept returning to the shoulder, scanning, searching, hoping to see something, anything, to tell me it hadn't been my imagination. But it was empty. Only the long stretch of road, the fog curling against the guardrail posts, and the echo of my own heartbeat in my ears. I tried to focus on the engine hum, the tires rolling over wet asphalt, anything familiar. But the image of those vanishing tracks, where gravel had compressed and then vanished, refused to leave my mind. It wasn't just that the figure disappeared. It was the precision of it, the impossibility. My brain screamed for a rational explanation, and my gut whispered something darker. Minutes passed, or was it hours? Time stretched oddly on this road. Every curve, every dip, every mile marker repeated the same monotonous, stretching rhythm. And then I felt it, a presence, faint, just beyond the reach of the headlights, almost brushing against the cab. Not a shadow, not a figure, but a weight in the air, something that seemed to be following me at the exact distance the figure had been standing on the shoulder. I froze. My eyes darted to the side mirrors. Nothing. The fog obscured everything beyond 20 feet. But the feeling, prickling, subtle, insistent, was undeniable. Something had stepped out behind the guardrail. Or perhaps it had never been behind it at all. I forced my eyes back to the road, forcing my hands to grip the wheel tighter. The highway stretched ahead, black and endless. I couldn't shake the idea that the shoulder had marked me somehow, that the tracks weren't just a path. They were a warning, a boundary I shouldn't cross. I tried talking aloud to calm myself. It's just a person, just a hitchhiker, maybe tired, maybe scared. They went into the woods, that's all. But the words sounded hollow. My voice echoed oddly in the cab, bouncing back at me, and I realized I wasn't just talking to myself. I was answering to something unseen, something that had been waiting. Every turn of the wheel, every flick of the wipers across the windshield kept the figure just out of reach. I told myself to keep moving. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't imagine. Just drive. The fog began to thin slightly, revealing the edges of the guardrail and the dark outline of the ditch beyond. I kept glancing, unable to help myself, and then, there, a flash, a glint of metal, maybe a belt buckle, maybe the edge of a shoe, but it was gone in an instant, swallowed by the fog, leaving nothing behind. My pulse quickened. Every rational part of me screamed to leave, to call it in, to put as much distance as possible between me and that spot. And yet, I couldn't. My eyes kept returning to the place where the figure had vanished, the tracks that had disappeared, the impossible nothingness that had replaced them. I drove faster now, the tires hissing against wet asphalt, headlights cutting through the thinning fog. Every mile seemed both shorter and longer at once. I wanted to tell myself it was over, that the road would return to normal, that I would see the end of the guardrail, the trees lining the shoulder. But something had changed. That brief encounter. The vanishing figure, the tire tracks that led nowhere, had altered the road. The air itself seemed heavier now, more deliberate, as though the highway remembered, as though it, too, was watching me. I tried to imagine a rational explanation, a trick of the headlights, a hallucination brought on by fatigue. Maybe someone had been hiding, watching me, moving out of sight with the precision of shadows, but my gut refused to accept it. The tracks had no origin, no destination. They simply existed, and then they didn't. I swallowed hard, taking the air in sharply. Every nerve screamed at me, warning me not to stop, not to pause, not to look. But the image of those tracks, the knowledge of that figure, vanished behind the guardrail, was burned into my memory. It would not leave. Hours later, or maybe minutes, I reached a small stretch of highway where the fog had lifted completely. Streetlights flickered dimly, illuminating the edges of the road. For a moment, relief washed over me. Nothing moved, nothing followed. The shoulder was clear. The guardrail, just a guardrail. But I knew better. The night had left its mark. Something had been there. Something had vanished. And I would never forget the way it felt. Standing just out of reach, watching, letting me see it only long enough to understand that it wasn't gone at all. Somewhere behind that guardrail, the air still holds a memory. And the next person who drives a stretch of road at night may find themselves staring at nothing, only to realize that nothing is far more alive than they ever imagined. I've been on the night shift long enough to recognize the silence that creeps into a radio room after midnight. The kind of quiet that isn't just empty. It presses against your ears, fills your chest with a weight you can't shake. The office was nearly deserted. The other officers were out on patrol or asleep at home, leaving me alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the low whine of the old police radios. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, staring at the board of frequencies blinking like tiny stars across the console. Most of them were quiet, dead, routine patrol chatter here and there, the occasional static burst, but nothing that would pull me out of my half-awake fog. I was waiting for nothing, as usual. Then it came. A voice, faint at first, barely more than a hiss, crackling through a frequency marked long dead. Channel 12 Alpha, officially abandoned for nearly 20 years. My finger hovered over the switch, thinking it must be someone testing the transmitter, a prank, static that sounded like speech. But then the voice sharpened, urgent, trembling. Help, please, to anyone. My stomach turned over. I froze, listening. The voice was strained, desperate, distorted by static, but unmistakably human. The cadence, the inflection, it wasn't automated or replayed. Someone was calling out from somewhere. Somewhere out there in the dark, reaching across decades of silence to this exact frequency. I tried to respond, flipping the switch and pressing the microphone. This is County Dispatch. Who is this? Identify yourself. Static. Then again. Don't come near. They're watching. My pulse spiked. I've been on calls before. Domestic disputes, lost hikers, drunks wandering highways. But nothing like this. Channel 12 Alpha had been officially decommissioned after some glitch decades ago. Nothing transmitted there. Nothing. And yet, here was a voice cutting through the dead air. I fumbled with the microphone, adjusting the gain, twisting knobs that hadn't been touched in years. The voice continued, more insistent now. Trembling with fear, I could almost taste through the speaker. Please, you have to, before it finds me. And then silence. I leaned back, gripping the edge of the console. My mouth was dry. Every rational part of my brain screamed that it had to be a hoax, a prankster broadcasting over a forgotten frequency. But the fear in that voice, it wasn't faked. My hand shook slightly as I tried to calibrate the radio, searching for interference, for clues, for anything to explain what I had just heard. Static filled the air. Then again, faintly, almost imperceptibly, the voice returned. I'm by the old bridge. They're coming. Goosebumps raced across my arms. I knew that bridge. Everyone did. It was a narrow crossing of the creek, surrounded by dense woods, miles from the nearest house. A place kids dared each other to run to at night. I patrolled it countless times. It was supposed to be safe, or at least empty enough for the occasional trespasser. But the way this voice spoke, panicked, trembling, it didn't belong to prankster. I tried to respond again, heart thudding in my chest. Identify yourself. This is County Dispatch. Stay on the line. Nothing. Only static, hissing, whispering. Then, almost immediately, "They know you hear me. Don't come." The words hit me in the gut. My rational mind resisted. Someone calling out from decades ago? That was impossible. A dead channel couldn't transmit. And yet, there was voice vibrating through the air, reaching me. The impossible wasn't a question anymore. It was fact. I reached for the logbook, flipping through entry from years past. Officers' names, reports of lost hikers, minor accidents, some marked unresolved. My fingers froze on an entry dated 15 years prior. A report of distress call from exactly that same bridge, never resolved. Officer Carroll, last seen near the creek, never found. His report had gone cold, shelved, forgotten. And now I was hearing the echo of something that shouldn't exist. Stay away, or... The voice faltered, broken by static. "They'll take you too." I swallowed hard, gripping the desk. My eyes flicked the clock. 2:17 a.m. I was supposed to be alone. I was supposed to be safe in the station. Yet here I was, listening to a voice that didn't belong to this time, warning me with an urgency that seeped under my skin. The radio hissed again. I leaned in closer. There were other sounds beneath the voice, subtle but undeniable. Footsteps, or water moving. Breathing, faint, irregular. Every hair on my neck stood on end. My pulse raced, and for the first time in years, I felt that prickling sense of dread that makes you question whether you should be anywhere at all. I grabbed a notebook, scribbling down what I heard, word for word, a habit from training, when panic and fear could cloud judgment. If this was a prank, I'd have evidence. If not, at least I'd have something to explain it later. Then the voice shifted, clearer now, almost at normal pitch, like it had somehow edged closer through the static. Under, the bridge, the water, they move in shadows. I shivered. I knew the creek beneath that bridge. I'd walked its banks during daylight, checked for debris, for hazards, for anything a driver or hiker might stumble on. But I had never felt fear there. Not real fear. Not like this. And yet, the voice painted a scene that didn't belong to logic. Shadows moving under the water, reaching, watching, waiting. The hair on my arms prickled as I imagined what could hide in that creek, in the darkness under the bridge, in a place that had been silent for decades. The rational part of me, trained, experienced, disciplined, tried to argue. Currents, animals, echoes, it's just radio interference. There's no one, there's nothing, but the voice persisted. Weak but insistent. They don't leave, not ever. I realized I hadn't moved for a long time. My chair creaked as I shifted, one hand still on the microphone. I thought of Officer Carroll lost, and how many had vanished along this stretch of road, unaccounted for, unsolved. Was this a warning from him, or something else? Something that knew I would be here, listening, alone at this exact hour? I tried to reach the dispatcher line, dialing the patrol units. Maybe a co-worker could confirm. Maybe someone else could hear it. But every call went through as normal. No static, no voice, no warning. Just routine, boring chatter. I felt the isolation creep in, the suffocating weight of being the only one hearing something that should have been impossible. And then the voice stopped. Not a fade, not a pause, just a sudden, brutal cut to dead silence. The frequency was quiet. The hum of the radio filled my ears, nothing else. My pulse thundered. I kept the microphone pressed to my lips, willing the static to return, willing for any trace of that voice. Nothing. I leaned back, exhausted, stomach twisting. Rationality tried to anchor me. It had to be a prank. Some amateur ham operator broadcasting through a long-dead frequency. But every instinct screamed no. This was something else. Something that shouldn't exist, but did. Something that could reach through decades and across silence to make itself known. I shut down the radio, sat in the dark office with a low hum of the fluorescent lights filling the void, and thought about the bridge, the creek, Officer Carroll, the missing, the voice. I couldn't stop thinking that someone or something was still there, waiting, watching, and that by answering, even with words into a dead channel, I had marked myself. I leaned my head against my palms, staring at the console, willing sleep to take me, to erase the memory, but the fear lingered, insistent, like an echo in the walls. I knew I wouldn't forget it. Not tonight, not ever. And deep down, I knew I wasn't just listening anymore. I had been heard. The road stretched out before me like a ribbon of darkness, and the faint hiss of tires over worn asphalt was the only sound that grounded me in reality. The air smelled damp, earthy, the kind that clings to your clothes and hair after a night rain, even when the sky is clear. I could still feel the residue of that long-dead frequency in my chest, like an echo that refused to fade. Every nerve in me was tense, waiting for something that I couldn't name. I slowed the cruiser as the shoulder widened, grass bending under the occasional gust of wind. That's when I noticed it. The subtle indentation in the gravel, the faint outline of something dragged along the edge of the road. I stopped the car and stepped out, boots crunching on the loose stones, my flashlight cutting through the darkness in a shaky beam. The first thing that struck me was the smell. Metal, wet soil, something faintly coppery. My stomach twisted, and I swallowed hard. The ground told a story, if you knew how to read it. Footprints, shallow but distinct, trailed along the shoulder. Then the scratches in the dirt, scuff marks that curved toward the tree lean, signs of a struggle. And yet, there was no body. Nothing. Just absence. I followed the prints, keeping my hand on the grip of my sidearm. Every shadow seemed to shift and pulse just beyond the reach of the light. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had fallen, crawled off into the woods. But the marks didn't continue. They ended abruptly, pressed into the soil as if the person had simply been lifted off the earth. I shivered. I crouched, examining a deep scrape on the guardrail. Tufts of hair clung to the jagged metal, matted with dirt. My flashlight trembled in my hands as I held it close to the strands. Whoever had been here had been small, maybe slight, but the violence was undeniable. There was fear etched into every mark, every indentation in the soil. I swallowed and whispered, almost myself, "Carol?" No answer, only the night breathing back at me. I moved slowly along the line of prints, careful not to disturb anything. Every step was deliberate, my boots silent on the damp ground. The wind shifted again, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard it, the faint crunch of ground behind me, in step with my own. I froze. My flashlight danced across the shadows, catching the outline of the trees, the bend of the guardrail, nothing more. And then the wind carried a faint whisper. "Here." I spun, heart hammering. Nothing, just the trees, swaying, the shadows lengthening as the light flickered. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I shook my head, telling myself it was a wind, that I was alone, that the evidence at my feet didn't want to speak. But the glove, crumpled and half buried in gravel, was a voice I couldn't ignore. Someone had been here. Someone had been taken, or had taken themselves somewhere beyond the reach of logic. I followed the footprints again, crouching beside them, tracing the edges with a gloved finger. They led closer to the creek, where the water whispered under the trees. The reflection of my flashlight danced on the surface, fractured by ripples, and I saw the disturbance in the mud at the edge. Not a fall, not a stumble, just an indentation that didn't belong to any shape I recognized. And then I heard it, a splash, faint and almost deliberate, as though something had slipped beneath the surface, leaving the water smooth and still again. I swallowed, trying to calm my breathing, stay rational. I whispered, but every instinct screamed otherwise. I had patrolled this stretch of river before, often alone, and I'd never seen anything like this. Tracks leading nowhere, signs of a fight, the faint odor of iron in the air, and a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. I looked around, the beam of my flashlight scanning for movement, trees pressing closer, shadows pooling at the edge of vision. The scrape on the guardrail gleamed under the light. I crouched again, my fingers tracing the marks. Someone had fought here, but who and where had they gone? A breeze stirred the leaves, carrying another whisper, almost audible, almost human. "Follow." I froze. My heart jumped. The voice, or what I thought I heard, was distant, distorted, like it had traveled across water and trees before reaching me. I swallowed hard, gripping my flashlight tighter. My rational mind screamed to ignore it. But the evidence at my feet screamed louder. Someone had been here, struggling, and then nothing. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the creek. The footprints ended at the edge, where mud met water, flattened by something heavy or invisible. My fingers brushed the wet soil. It was colder than the air, colder than the ground around it, like the earth had been drained of warmth in that exact spot. I shivered. Then the sound came again. Footsteps. Soft, uneven, circling. I swung the flashlight toward the source. But nothing moved. Just shadows. The forest held its breath, and I felt like a trespass in a space that was not meant for the living. I tried calling out again, voice low but firm. "Who's there?" Stepped into the light. Silence. I took a step back, and the beam caught a new detail. The imprint beneath the guardrail, elongated, distorted, not human. Something pressed into the earth that left no ordinary trace. My stomach knotted. I looked around desperately, flashlight cutting jagged paths through the darkness. The wind picked up, carried with the faint scent of wet metal, the faint whisper again, and a sound like breathing close, but not quite behind me. I staggered back toward my car, boots slipping on wet gravel. Every instinct screamed to get inside, lock the doors, drive away, and forget the stretch of road ever existed. And yet, I kept glancing over my shoulder, drawn by some compulsive need to understand what I'd just witnessed. I climbed into the patrol car, locking the doors with a trembling hand. The air inside smelled faintly of damp leather and cold metal, and my pulse hammered in my chest. I kept the flashlight trained on the shoulder, scanning for movement, for any sign of what had left the glove, the prints, the disturbed earth. Nothing, only darkness. I started the engine, the headlights carving a pale path through the night. The whisper returned, faint, carried on the wind. Too late, I swallowed. Gripping the wheel, voice caught in my throat. The road stretched ahead, empty, but the sense of being watched clung to me like a second skin. I didn't know if it had followed me or lingered in the shadows behind. I drove in silence, eyes darting to every swaying tree, every curve of the guardrail. The creek ran alongside, whispering, reflecting the moonlight in broken patterns. And beneath it all, I could still feel the residue of the struggle, the traces of a presence that had touched the world and vanished, leaving me with only questions and a gnawing certainty that it wasn't finished with me. I didn't stop driving until the trees thinned and lights of a distant town appeared. But even then, when I parked and killed the engine, the image of the footprints, the glove, the strange imprint beneath the guardrail lingered. My pulse hadn't slowed, my hand still shook. I had seen evidence of a struggle that led nowhere, a person or something, taken by a force I cannot explain. I kept the cruiser running a while longer, flashlight scanning the shoulder one last time. The night was still, almost calm, but I knew better. The echo of that place, the whispering, the impossible tracks, they weren't gone. They waited. I drove on finally, but every mile, every shadow, every rustle of leaves reminded me of the shoulder, of what had vanished before me, and of what might be following. And deep in my gut, I knew this wasn't over. Not for me. Not for anyone who ever wandered close enough to hear the echoes from the shoulder. I had been driving for hours, the glow of the headlights cutting through a fog that clung to the road like a living thing. The white mist hugged the asphalt and the tree lean, muffling sound, warping distance, making the familiar stretch of highway feel alien. Every mile felt longer than the last, and my hands were tense on the wheel, knuckles white beneath my gloves. That's when it started, the static on the radio. At first, I thought it was a ghost station, some long-abandoned frequency flickering to life. But the static didn't stay static. There was a pattern, a rhythm, and beneath it, a voice. Distorted, broken, warped like it had been underwater and broadcast through miles of wire, but unmistakably human. Mark, Mark, turn off the road. I froze. My name, my own voice echoed back at me, or rather, the voice of someone or something that knew it. My pulse hit my throat, cold sweat prickling along my spine. The radio cracked again, static splitting like broken glass. Mark, get out, look behind. I slammed the brakes hard, tires skidding on the wet asphalt. The fog was thicker now, curling around the headlights, hiding the edges of the road, swallowing the trees. I twisted the dial, thinking it was some trick of reception, a prank, anything, but every station hissed and warped into that same voice, repeating my name, giving instructions I couldn't ignore. Mark, step out. See what's waiting. My hands trembled. I gripped the wheel, heart hammering, mind racing. I told myself it was a trick of fatigue, of night driving too long, the fog playing games with my senses. But even in the silence between bursts of static, the words lingered, crawling under my skin. I stepped on the brakes again and killed the engine. The sudden silence almost louder than the voice itself. The fog pressing closer, thick enough to hide the guardrails, the trees, the road ahead. I could barely see the reflection of my own eyes in the side mirrors, and in that moment, the voice came again, clearer, closer, almost inside the cab. Mark, follow the sound, do not stop. I swallowed hard, the words clawing at my mind. Follow the sound? What sound? All I could hear was the engine ticking as it cooled, the fog whispering past the tires, and the low hum of static lingering in my ears. I felt like the world had narrowed to this one stretch of asphalt, and that distorted voice guided me somewhere I didn't want to go. I tried to move forward, slow, careful, but the fog seemed to shift around me. The familiar curves of the road were gone, replaced by an endless white nothing. Then I saw them, shapes, just beyond the reach of my headlights, flickering in and out like mirages. I squinted, trying to make sense of them. Trees? Figures? Nothing stayed long enough to tell. The radio burst again. Mark, left, now do not look back. I jerked the wheel, almost colliding with an unseen curve. My mind screamed at me, telling me to ignore it, to drive straight, to get out of this fog. But the voice had a weight to it, insistent and cold. It wasn't just instructions. It was a presence, a force guiding me, pushing me along this isolated highway. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing, just white mist. Yet every instinct screamed that something was there, hiding, waiting. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe another car, another driver playing a prank. But the voice knew my name, and it knew things that no one could know. Mark, stop, watch the headlights. I froze again, gripping the wheel. Headlights? There was nothing ahead, nothing behind. But then I noticed the reflections in the fog, tiny, shifting glimmers, like pinpricks of light dancing at the edge of my vision. They weren't headlights, not really. They were something else, something alive in the mist. And the voice seemed to come from them, echoing, bending, folding the space around me. I forced myself to breathe, to think, but the instructions kept coming, urgent, fractured. Mark, step out, do not run, do not shout, follow. Follow what? I peered through the windshield, heart hammering. The fog seemed endless, stretching infinitely in both directions. The road ahead was hidden. The lines faded into nothing. I could feel the weight of it, the fog pressing on me, heavy and damp, thick enough to coat my lungs with anticipation and fear. I hesitated, every instinct screaming to drive, to escape, to turn around. But then a movement, faint, fleeting, but unmistakable, curled in periphery. Something was moving just beyond the glow of my headlights. I spun the wheel, gripping the dash as if it could anchor me, and the voice came again. Mark, step out, see what waits. I shook, mind racing. Step out? Into what? The fog? The void? And yet, I could not ignore it. The voice had a pull, subtle but undeniable, threading itself through my thoughts like a spider weaving a web. I was caught and I knew it. Finally, I opened the door, the cold air biting at my face, moisture soaking through my jacket. The silence of the fog was total, oppressive. I could see nothing, only the faint glow from my headlights, absorbed by the mist. And then I heard it, another sound beneath the static. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling, but not touching the gravel. They weren't mine. I spun, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam cut through the fog, catching glimpses of shapes that should not exist. Branches bent unnaturally, shadows stretched at impossible angles. And somewhere in the whiteness, I thought I saw a figure, a man, a child, something that shouldn't be. It disappeared before I could focus, and the voice whispered again, almost satisfied. Mark, come closer, see them. My knees shook. My hands gripped the flashlight tighter, knuckles cracking. The world had narrowed to this single moment, standing on asphalt, shrouded in fog, listening to a voice that was both my own and utterly alien. I stepped forward, each movement deliberate, my boots silent against the wet road. The footsteps followed, synchronized with mine, keeping pace, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. I reached a bend in the road, the fog curling tighter, and there it was, the radio again crackling, distorting. This time, the message was clearer, insistent. Mark, do not look. Turn your head. Do not see. I froze. My heart thudded painfully. I wanted to obey and run simultaneously. I wanted to turn and see and remain blind at the same time. The fog held me in place. A trap, a mirror of my own hesitation. And then it happened. I heard my own voice distorted, coming from the fog itself, repeating the instructions. My name called over and over, bending and breaking. Layer like echoes trapped in a cave, impossible to ignore. I stepped back, stumbled, my flashlight catching a glimpse of something pressed into the asphalt. Not footprints, not tire tracks. Something else, something that had weight, presence, and intent. I couldn't tell if it was leaving the ground or emerging from it. And then the fog thickened, swallowing it, and I was alone again, save for the voice, that persistent, inescapable call. I stumbled back to the car, every step feeling like a lifetime. The radio fell silent for a moment as I reached the door. Relief surged, but it was brief. The static returned, louder this time, cutting through the fog like a scream. And then the words, Mark, you will return, follow forever. I slammed the door, locking it, fumbling with the keys. The heater hissed, condensation fogging the windows. I tried to focus on the road ahead, tried to rationalize, to convince myself of in the fog, the long night, exhaustion playing tricks. But I could feel it, like a presence pressed against the thin barrier of glass and steel, watching, waiting. I drove, headlights piercing the mist, but the fog seemed endless, folding the world back on itself. Every curve of the road was the same as the last. Every shadow flickered. Every reflection hinted at movement where none should exist. And beneath it all, the voice pulsed, insistent, impossible to ignore. Hours passed, maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. Time itself seemed to bend in the fog, stretched and warped. And all the while, that distorted, intimate voice whispered my name, layering itself into my thoughts, guiding me, holding me just at the edge of comprehension. I didn't stop. I couldn't. And I knew, deep in my chest, that the fog would not let me, that the voice would follow, always, until I either vanished into mist or lost my mind trying to obey its impossible instructions. The radio fell silent once more, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I was free. But even then, in the corner of my vision, shapes twisted, shadows danced, and I could still hear the faint, warped echo. Mark forever. And I drove on, the fog swallowing the headlights, the road, and perhaps, in time the radio crackled again as I drove, a low static whisper beneath the soften of the tires on asphalt. I had been listening to transmissions for hours now, the same routine calls and check-ins that fill the night shift in quiet towns like ours. Lost dogs, barking dogs, abandoned vehicles. But something about tonight felt different. There was a tension behind the words, a pause that wasn't in the logs, an undercurrent that pricked at the edges of my mind like frozen fingers. Then it happened. The call came through, abrupt, frantic. Unit 37, water by the east. And then nothing. Just static, broken and sharp, like someone had yanked the cord from the speaker. I leaned closer, hand tightening on the wheel. My stomach sank. I tried to replay the transmission, hitting the scan button repeatedly, but the frequency was dead. The radio's this was normal again, clean, empty, almost too clean. The words lingered in my ears like smoke. Unit 37, water by the east. I swallowed hard. That was Jenkins. It had to be. No one else called in from that stretch of river at this hour. My pulse jumped, my hand shaking slightly despite myself. A night like any other, filled with routine checks and quiet vigilance, had turned into something else entirely. I eased the truck, to a stop near the riverbank. Fog rolled across the water in thick, lazy waves, curling over the surface like fingers reaching out. The moon tried to push through the haze, but it barely lit anything. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening. The usual night sounds. Crickets, water lapping against the rocks, the occasional distant bark, seemed distant, muted. Even the fog felt wrong, heavier than it should be, pressing against the truck in a way that made the air taste metallic and cold. I got out, boots crunching on gravel. My flashlight beam cut through the mist, illuminating only the riverbank. It was empty. No one. Not Jenkins, not anything. Just the water, dark and moving in subtle, impossible ways, as if hiding something beneath its surface. I called his unit on the radio, static filling the airwaves before it clicked to life. Jenkins? Unit 37, come in. Nothing. Only that same hissing static, lingering too long before fading to silence again. My throat went dry. I tried again, and again. Each attempt was met with the same dead air, as if the night itself had swallowed him whole. I stepped closer to the water, boots squelching in mud. The fog seemed to curl around me tighter, blocking my peripheral vision. I could hear the river, the faint scrape of pebbles shifting the current, and something else. A whisper? No, not quite. A sound like someone dragging their fingers along the surface of the water, low and deliberate. I swung the flashlight, scanning the river, the banks, the brush. Nothing, but the feeling persisted, watching me, waiting. I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. Jenkins wasn't the first officer to disappear during night duty, but I had never felt it so personally. His voice had just been here, just moments ago, and now it was gone. It was like the air had swallowed him whole. I scanned the trees along the bank, the low-hanging branches, every shadow that flickered in my light, searching for anything human. Nothing moved, and yet I felt it, the prickle of eyes on my back, the heavy presence in the fog, as though the night itself was holding its breath. My instinct screamed to leave, to get back to the truck, to radio for backup, but I couldn't, not yet, not until I knew he was somewhere, that he hadn't simply vanished. The river stretched before me, black and endless under the faint glow of moonlight. I could see ripples forming far off, subtle, irregular, like something large brushing against the surface from below. My stomach turned. I told myself it was just fish, the current, debris, but the way the water moved didn't make sense. Jenkins? I whispered, voice trembling, but firm enough to break the silence. Nothing, only the faint echo of my own voice carried back, warped by the fog. I took another step closer to the edge, flashlight beam wavering. The ripples grew larger, converging toward a single point in the middle of the river. My breath hitched. I tried to focus on that point. Straining my eyes through the mist, a shape emerged, just barely like smoke taking form. Not solid, not entirely human, but unmistakably alive. I froze. My pulse slammed in my ears. This wasn't just a disappearance. This wasn't just an accident. The water, it had swallowed him, but it hadn't let go. Something had risen. Something wrong. Something that shouldn't exist in this quiet town at night. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My mind raced, replaying the transmission over and over. Unit 37, water by the east. The words cut through the night like a warning I had ignored. The static returned low, vibrating through the air. Then, almost imperceptible at first, I heard it. Jenkins' voice, distorted, slurred, echoing across the water. Help, don't stay away. I jumped. My flashlight shook in my hands. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get back to the truck, to call it in, but my legs were frozen. I was part of this now, trapped by my own curiosity, drawn in by the same thing that had claimed him. And then the transmission cut. Abruptly, silence, dead air. I stood there, chest heaving, the flashlight beam swinging wildly over the fog-choked river. Nothing, no voice, no figure, no movement in the water, just the mist curling over the surface, hiding its secrets. The only sound was my own breathing, harsh and uneven, and the subtle scrape of the river as if it had never moved. I thought about calling for backup again, but my radio was silent. Not just silent, dead. I twisted the knobs, hit the scan, tried every button. Nothing. The frequency that had carried Jenkins' voice, his final, terrified message, had vanished, like it had never existed at all. A cold sweat rolled down my neck. I backed toward the truck, every sense on edge. Every snap of a twig in the fog, every shift in the mist felt amplified, as though the night was alive and watching. I reached the cab, hand shaking, and gripped the door handle. I sat inside, doors locked, trying to rationalize. Maybe it had fallen into the river, gotten caught in the current. Maybe it was a prank, a hallucination, my mind playing tricks after hours of night shift. But my gut told me something else, something darker, something that had nothing to do with fatigue or accident. I glanced at the river through the windshield. The fog had changed. It wasn't thickening or thinning. It was moving, curling in subtle patterns, almost deliberate. Shadows shifted beneath the surface, twisting against the faint moonlight. And for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw his boots, Jenkins' boots, just above the waterline. And then they were gone. I wanted to leave. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to drive, to call it in, to get as far away from this stretch of river as possible. But part of me, the part that could never ignore a call for help, felt trapped in the echo of that transmission. The last word before the line cut off weren't just a message. They were a tether, a connection to something unseen, lingering in the fog, waiting. Hours later, I was still there, watching, listening, waiting for some sign that he, or whatever it was, might return. Every distant noise, every flicker of movement in the mist made me jump, my heart hammering in my chest. The radio remained dead, unresponsive, but the fear, the presence, the sense of being watched, it never left. I could feel the river moving under the ice of fog and night, carrying secrets I was not meant to understand. And the transmission, the line cut so suddenly, so deliberately, that I knew one thing. It hadn't ended. Not really. It was waiting, patient, unbroken in some way my mind could not grasp. And until I left this place, it would follow, echoing in every pause, every shadow, every breath I took. I finally started the truck, engine groaning against the cold, and drove slowly back to the main road. The fog still clung, heavy and oppressive. Every mile felt heavier than the last, every curve in the asphalted trap. I glanced in the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see him standing there, watching, waiting. But there was only mist, only silence. Yet I knew the line hadn't truly ended. Somewhere, just beyond the reach of my headlights, the river held him, or it held something else, something patient, something that had learned my name. And the memory of that final, abrupt transmission, so sudden, so incomplete, would follow me through every night shift to come. I could hear it still if I listened closely beneath the tires, beneath the wind, beneath the hum of the engine. Unit 3-7, water by the east. Then silence. I had been driving for hours, the highway stretching out like a ribbon of black beneath the moon. The kind of road that seems to exist in a space outside time, where your mind starts playing tricks on you, turning every shadow into something alive. My headlights cut through the night, reflecting off the faint white lines that curved and twisted. But beyond that, nothing. Just trees, dark and motionless, and the occasional glimpse of a field that glimmered silver in the moonlight. I was tired, eyes heavy, and every part of me wanted to pull into the next rest stop, shut the truck off, and just let sleep swallow me whole. But work didn't stop for fatigue. There were deliveries to make, schedules to keep. So I kept driving, the hum of the engine a constant companion, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Then I saw it, a figure, standing on the shoulder of the road, thumb out, just one hand raised in that familiar hitchhiker gesture. I slowed instinctively, a mix of caution and the faint pull of curiosity washing over me. Who in their right mind was out here at this hour? The moon caught the silhouette, and it was small, almost fragile, with a coat that flapped in the wind. Hair that I couldn't make out, dark and tangled, blowing across a face I couldn't quite see. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. I'd been driving too long, tired, staring at the same asphalt for miles. But it was there, steady, thumb extended, waiting for me to notice, I slowed further, my tires crunching on gravel as I moved toward the shoulder. Something about the figure made my stomach tighten. Not fear exactly, not yet, but a strange, prickling awareness, like a warning lodged deep in my chest. Need a ride? I muttered, my voice barely audible over the truck's engine. No response, just a figure, perfectly still except for the subtle sway of the coat in the wind. I studied them more closely. The face, pale, featureless enough that I couldn't make out an expression, though the eyes. I thought I saw eyes, dark, reflecting the headlights, locked on me like they were the only thing that existed. I wanted to keep driving, to let the figure fade into the night, but something compelled me to stop. The road was empty, miles in either direction with nothing but trees and the faint glimmer of the moon on the asphalt. It felt isolated, like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. I eased the truck to a stop, shifting it slightly off the road. My pulse raced, hammering in my ears. The figure took a slow step forward, closer to the lane, but never fully onto the asphalt. Their movements were fluid, deliberate, too precise to be natural. The kind of movement you notice when your mind is trying to understand something it shouldn't. I rolled down the window, the cold night air rushing in, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine, sharp and clean. Where you headed? I asked, though the words felt foolish. The figure didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there, thumb outstretched, waiting, and then I noticed it. Something subtle, almost impossible to describe. The air around them seemed to shimmer, like heat above asphalt on a summer day, but cold. I blinked, shook my head, trying to clear my vision. Maybe it was a fatigue. Maybe it was the moonlight. But there was something about that stillness that pressed into me, heavy and strange. I exhaled a shallow, shaky breath, trying to force calm into my voice. Hop in, then I'll take you somewhere safe. The figure tilted its head slightly, almost imperceptibly. I couldn't read it, couldn't tell if it was acknowledgement or something else entirely. I reached across the console, unlocking the passenger door. And in that instant, before they moved, I felt it, that warning again, stronger this time, like icy fingers trailing down my spine. Something was off, wrong. The rational part of me, the part that understood the world, schedules, deliveries, maps, was screaming at me to drive, to leave the spot immediately. But my body wouldn't comply. The figure stepped closer. I could see their boots now, scuffed and muddy, the faint glint of metal on the soles catching the moonlight. The air shifted, colder, tighter around the cab of the truck. My stomach knotted, heart thundering. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. I blinked, head snapping from side to side. Nothing. The shoulder was empty. No coat flapping. No thumb raised. The only motion was the wind teasing the branches along the road. My hands trembled on the wheel, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Hello," I called softly, but the sound felt swallowed by the night. I leaned out, scanning the trees, the dark fields, the road that stretched endlessly ahead. The fog had begun to drift and low over the asphalt, silver and cold under the moon. There was no sign of them, not a footprint, not a shadow, just a faint gravel crush beneath my tires. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. My pulse hadn't slowed. Every instinct screamed at me to drive, to leave, but something held me there, frozen in place, aware of a presence that shouldn't exist. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sound that almost resembled a laugh, soft and low. My hands tightened on the wheel. The fog thickened, curling along the shoulder, pressing like it was alive, like it had swallowed the figure and was now holding it just beyond my sight. I checked the rear-view mirror reflexively. Nothing. Empty road behind me. But the feeling of eyes on me remained, low in my chest, steady, patient. I started the truck slowly, easing back onto the asphalt. Every shadow seemed sharper now. Every flicker of the trees and my headlights too precise, too deliberate. I kept looking for movement on the shoulder, expecting them to step out, expecting something, but nothing came. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that they were there, watching, waiting, somewhere in the fog that clung to the highway, that had swallowed the trees, the signs, the night itself. I drove on, faster now, the engine louder, tires gripping the road as the speed could outrun the cold, the feeling, the warning. The road stretched ahead endlessly, moonlight glinting off the asphalt, fog rolling in sheets that seemed almost sentient. Every mile marker, every turn, every flicker of shadow made me tense, eyes darting from shoulder to mirror, waiting for thumb to appear again, waiting for the figure that had vanished like smoke in the moonlight. Hours later, long after the fog thinned and the road began to curve toward familiar towns, I found myself glancing repeatedly over my shoulder, half expecting to see that small, silent hitchhiker reappear. The memory of their stillness, the way they had tilted their head, the impossibility of their presence, it haunted me more than any horror on TV ever could. Even now, when I drive alone at night, I can't help but remember the thumb in the moonlight, the silent figure standing on the shoulder of a desolate highway, waiting for something I don't fully understand. And I know, somewhere in the dark folds of night, they're still out there, waiting for the next driver foolish enough or unlucky enough to slow down. I thought I had put the encounter behind me. The fog had thinned, the road stretched straight and empty ahead, and for a long while, there was nothing but the engine hum beneath me and the lowest of tires on asphalt. But it doesn't work that way. It never does. I was tired, bone deep, muscles aching from gripping the wheel too tightly for too long. My eyes burned from staring at the endless black ribbon of highway, but still, I drove. I told myself it was just nerves, fatigue, maybe the remnants of that impossible hitchhiker dancing at the edge of my mind, a trick of the light, the wind, or some exhausted part of me. And then I saw them. I caught it first in the rear-view mirror, a movement, subtle, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. At first, I thought it was a trick, a shadow shifting as the moonlight caught the trees differently. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked, squinting, trying to focus, and there it was, a figure, small, hunched slightly, seated in the back. I froze. The truck doors were locked. I had double-checked before leaving the fog shoulder, after the hitchhiker had vanished. Locked, bolted. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. And yet, there they were. The figure didn't move at first. Just sat there, still, the pale moonlight from the window, catching their outline. I could see the curve of shoulders, the hint ahead, the impossibility of them being there at all. My stomach dropped, twisting cold and hard. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to speak, though my throat felt dry. Who's there? No answer. Just a figure, small and silent, waiting. My pulse hammered in my ears. My fingers tightened on the wheel until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to look back, to confront what shouldn't exist, but something in me froze, telling me not to, warning me. I stole a glance in the mirror again. They were closer now. I could see faint features, though blurred, shadowed, hair that fell over their face, a pale, almost translucent skin, eyes that caught the dim moonlight and seemed impossibly dark, impossibly empty. And they weren't moving, not really, but somehow the air around them shifted, pressing against me, cold and tight, like the night itself was leaning in to observe. I tried to convince myself it was fatigue, the mind's cruel tricks after hours of solitude and the lingering image of the hitchhiker on the shoulder. But every instinct screamed that this was real, that impossible, that wrong. I jerked the wheel slightly, enough to glance back, and they were gone. Not in the seat where I expected, not sliding under the seat or tucked in the corner. Just gone. My chest heaved, lungs tight. I was shaking now, heart rattling against my ribs. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't rationalize it. And yet I could feel them, behind me, waiting, watching. I pulled the truck to the shoulder, tires crunching over loose gravel. I reached for the rear doors, double-checked the locks. Locked, just as I had known. My pulse thumped painfully in my temples. I want to call someone, anyone, but I was too far from signal, too far from civilization. Alone, completely alone, except for the impossible thing occupying my back seat. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel tighter, forcing myself to breathe, to think. Logic tried to claw its way back. Maybe it was a reflection, maybe a trick of the moonlight through the back window. Maybe I didn't want to finish the thought. I glanced in the mirror one more time. There they were again. Closer now, the outline more defined, head tilted slightly, as if they were studying me the way I was studying them. I could see a hand, pale, thin, resting lightly on the back of the passenger seat. And their eyes, those dark, impossible eyes, locked on mine. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled on the wheel. What do you want? My voice was low, cracked, but I had to speak. Had to acknowledge it, as if saying it aloud might anchor me to reality. No response, only that unbearable stillness, that impossible, oppressive weight of being watched. I tried to reason, to talk myself down. You're not real. You're just, my voice faltered. Just what? My mind couldn't finish. There was no precedent for this. Nothing rational could explain it. The truck shivered beneath me. Wind caught the doors, rattling the glass. And then I heard it. A whisper, low, almost imperceptible, coming from the back seat. The sound of a voice I didn't recognize. Not human, not natural, but somehow familiar. And it called my name. I jumped, hand clamping over my mouth. No, 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 no. The whisper repeated, slightly distorted, almost like it was underwater, but clear enough that I understood. My name spoken in a tone that felt like it was inside my head as much as in the cab. I couldn't move. I couldn't look back. My hands shook violently on the wheel. My pulse was a hammering drum. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, but I knew it was real. I tried to speak again, my voice trembling. What do you want? The figure leaned slightly forward, though still impossibly still. Their hand traced the top of the seat in a slow, deliberate motion, leaving a faint frost-like shimmer in the air behind it. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared again, they were gone. I twisted in my seat, frantically checking every corner of the back, the floor, under the seats. Empty. Nothing. Locked doors. Empty cab. And yet, I could feel it. That weight, that impossible presence lingering just beyond perception. I started the truck again, trying to force my mind to focus on the road, on the line stretching ahead. But every mirror, every shadow flicking in the moonlight, every curve of the road made me glance back, expecting that impossible shape to reappear. Minutes felt like hours. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, each mile marker passing like a heartbeat. And I couldn't shake the sensation that they were still there, watching, patient, silent, waiting for me to slip, for me to look away, for me to believe I was alone. I drove faster, engine growling, tires gripping the asphalt with an almost desperate insistence. I didn't care about speed limits, about deliveries, about anything. All I cared about was the impossibility in my back seat, the whispering eyes that shouldn't exist, the sense that the night itself had folded around me and trapped me inside a space I didn't understand. By the time the fog returned, thick and low, curling around the headlights like smoke, I hadn't spoken a word for minutes. My mouth was dry, my throat raw from trying to force my breath into control. I kept glancing in the mirror, almost too afraid to see what might be there, and yet unable to stop myself. I don't know how far I drove before the first hint of dawn crept into the horizon. The fog thinned, the highway straightened. The world returned in a mundane, unforgiving way. But I knew what I had seen, felt, experienced, and I knew it wasn't over. Even now, when I drive alone at night, I can't shake the memory of the rear-view stranger, the impossibility of it, the faint, distorted whisper my name, the way the air seemed to warp around them. And I know, somewhere on that highway, they wait, patient, silent, waiting for the next driver foolish enough, or unlucky enough, to glance back. I can't explain it. I can't rationalize it. All I know is that some things follow you in the dark, even when you think you're alone, even when the doors are locked. I tried to convince myself I was seeing things, that my mind, frayed by hours of driving alone, was replaying the same impossible image, a trick of fatigue or shadows. But I knew it wasn't a trick. I had seen it too clearly. The highway stretched before me, quiet, empty, the kind of blacktop that feels endless even when you know it isn't. The night hung heavy, a damp weight that clung to my skin and made the air taste metallic. My knuckles were white on the wheel, I didn't want to glance behind me, didn't want to risk seeing the impossible figure again, but I couldn't stop myself. The mirror held nothing at first, just the road, the moonlight slicing through misty tree leaves, and the faint glow of distant headlights, miles away, probably another late traveler. And then a movement, a flicker. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. My eyes darted to the back seat. The figure was gone. Completely, impossibly gone. My stomach twisted cold. I leaned forward, peering into the dark, the cab lit only by the dim dash lights. The empty seat stared back at me, innocuous, mundane. For a moment, I could almost believe it, almost pretend it had never been there. And then I saw it, a wet imprint. It was faint but unmistakable, the shape of a body compressed into the seat. The damp outline glimmered faintly under the dash light, edges wavering, like water trying to disappear into the fabric. The shape of legs, torso, the arc of a shoulder, and the faint impression of a thumb pressed into the cushion, just like the one I had seen in the moonlight when I first caught that hitchhiker. I froze. My breath left me in a long, rasping sigh. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't reflection or shadow. Someone, something, had been here, and now it was gone. I gripped the wheel harder, knuckles trembling. I wanted to scream, to curse the night, to drive until the asphalt ended, until my mind gave me answers I didn't want. But I couldn't. My mouth went dry, and the hum of the engine was the only sound I dared make. I reached a shaky hand back, brushing the seat. The fabric was wet, cold, and real. My fingers lingered over it, tracing the outline that had once been a person. A chill ran up my spine. That wasn't from the night air. I pulled my hand back quickly, as if the imprint could reach out and touch me. I forced myself to breathe, slowly, trying to calm the thundering in my chest. Logical thought clawed at me, desperate to find a reason. Maybe it was rain, but no. The interior of the cab was dry except for that exact wet patch. Maybe an animal had jumped in, but the shape was human. No, not just human. It was impossibly familiar, impossibly precise, like it had left a mark meant for me alone. I shook my head, muttering to myself, "It's gone. It's gone. Nothing's there." But I knew better. I knew what I had seen, and I knew what I felt. The air in the cab had shifted. It was heavier now, damned with something I couldn't name. I tried to focus on the road, but the image lingered, pressing in on me. My eyes kept darting back, half expecting the silhouette to reappear, half fearing it would. Every time I glanced, the wet imprint seemed darker, more defined, as if the figure had only just left, as if it were waiting for me to notice. The moonlight shifted across the cab, catching the outline, and in that instant, I swore I saw a faint movement in the seat, a ripple, almost like the fabric side under some unseen weight. I jerked my head back to the road. My pulse thundered. I told myself I was imagining it, that my mind was fraying under too many nights alone, too many impossible encounters. And yet, I couldn't shake it. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time was distorted in the foggy stretch of highway. I couldn't tell. Every passing mile, every dark curve, every distant tree lining the road made me glance back, hoping, fearing, knowing that the impossible was still close. Then the whisper came, low, almost imperceptible at first, curling around the cab like smoke. I froze, listening. The sound was faint, almost drowned out by the hum of the engine. My stomach coiled tight, and then I recognized it. The same rasp, distorted tone from the night before. My name, whispered, not from a radio, not from any device, just carried on the wind, or maybe something else entirely. Driver? I jerked in my seat, eyes darting around the interior. Nothing, just a wet imprint, just a cold seat, just a black night pressing in. My throat burned from unshed screams. Who's there? I demanded, my voice hoarse, cracking. No answer, just silence, thick and heavy. I gripped the wheel again, hands trembling. I wanted to drive faster, to escape, but my body was locked in a mix of terror and disbelief. I tried to rationalize, to convince myself it was an echo of fear, imagination run wild after too many lonely nights. But the seat spoke another truth. Someone or something had been here, real and tangible. I leaned forward, staring at the imprint. The air around it felt colder now, heavier, like the night itself was exhaling a warning. And in that moment, I saw it, or I thought I did, a faint shadow, impossibly thin, curling at the edge of the imprint. Not a solid form, not quite a figure, just a dark smear that shifted in periphery of my vision. I blinked rapidly, and it vanished. My chest ached, my mind racing. I couldn't rationalize this, couldn't call it anything normal. The highway stretched endlessly, unchanging, and I was trapped in a cab with a memory of something impossible, something that had been there and wasn't. I tried to focus, tried to tell myself I needed to keep moving, that the night would end, that the impossibility would dissolve with the first light. But I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. I could feel it in every nerve ending, in the small hairs on the back of my neck, in the quiet, oppressive weight pressing from the back seat. I kept driving, engine humming, windshield wet with condensation, eyes flicking to the rear-view mirror every few seconds, always expecting, always hoping I was imagining it. And then, briefly, just for a heartbeat, I saw it. Not the full figure, just a flicker of movement, a shadow stretching across the seat, fading before my eyes could fully register it. My heart leapt. I blinked. Gone. Only the wet outline remained. I pulled over at the next safe spot, trembling, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I reached back one more time, brushing my fingers across the wet imprint. Still there, cold, damp, and possibly real. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, staring at the seat, willing the sun to rise, willing the fog to lift, willing the impossible to vanish. And yet, even as the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, the imprint remained, stubbornly defying explanation. I drove the rest of the morning in a daze, every mirror glance a jolt to my nerves. Every shadow at the edge of the road, every flicker of movement made my pulse spike. I kept telling myself it was over, that it was gone for good, that the nightmare had left me. But I knew better. Some things leave marks. Some things vanish, leaving evidence behind. And some things linger patient, waiting, shaping themselves in the edges of your perception until you can't look away, can't sleep, can't forget. I haven't driven that highway since. Not at night, not alone, not ever. And even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel the wet imprint beneath my fingers, the shadow curling at its edge, the sense that the impossible wasn't gone. It was just fading, waiting for the right moment to return. The road stretched on, black and endless, swallowed in fog and moonlight, and every mile felt heavier than the one before. My hands stayed tight on the wheel, knuckles white, though I didn't dare look back more than a few seconds at a time. Not that it mattered. The back seat was empty, or at least it looked empty. I drove in silence, the kind that presses into your chest, filling your ears and thoughts until it drowns out everything else. The hum of the engine was the only sound, and it sounded hollow, like the world beyond the cab had gone mute. I told myself I was imagining it, that fatigue had conjured a phantom into the seat behind me. But deep down, I knew better. The imprint was gone. The wet outline that had burned into my memory had vanished. And yet, the feeling stayed, the weight at the edges of perception, the sense that eyes, countless invisible eyes, were following me, never quite letting me rest. I tried to focus on the road. Mile markers passed, unremarkable and unhelpful, stretching into the distance like tick marks on a clock I couldn't read. The fog pressed against the windshield, the beams of my headlights cutting through it in weak yellow knives, only illuminating the mist for a few feet ahead before it swallowed the light whole. I remembered the hitchhiker, the figure I had tried so hard to make sense of, the thumb in the moonlight, the shadowy silhouette, the wet imprint on the seat. It was gone now, and maybe that was better. Maybe the nightmare had ended. But even as I told myself that, the quiet whispered to me that endings weren't so simple. I passed a bend in the road, and something flickered in the corner of my eye, a flash of motion, or maybe just my mind rebelling against the darkness. My stomach lurched, and I jerked the wheel slightly, swerving against the fog. Nothing was there, nothing ever was, except for the faint sense of presence, the invisible pulse that kept pressing at the back of my mind. Hours slipped past, or maybe minutes. Time had lost meaning in the monotony of asphalt and fog. I kept checking the mirrors over and over, half expecting to see that familiar shadow lurking in the back, half hoping to see it so I could confront it, understand it, make it real. But every glance returned the same answer. Empty cab, black seats, and the endless road. And still I felt it. Watched, not just looked at, but examined, assessed. A presence that didn't breathe or move, yet made itself known in every nerve ending. My hands shook slightly on the wheel. I swallowed. The dry taste in my mouth made me realize I hadn't drank anything in hours. Not that water would help. I didn't need water. I needed the impossible to stop pressing against me. I tried to remember the last time I had felt truly alone, not just in the physical sense, but in that sense of being unobserved. It had been a long time ago, before the night had swallowed me, before the cab had become a coffin on wheels. Now, the solitude had weight, and in that weight there was terror. I saw a movement again, faint at the very edge of my vision. I jerked my head sharply. Nothing but the fog curling around the headlights, like smoke over a fire that didn't exist. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself the mind could make monsters from fog and exhaustion. But I wasn't imagining it. Not entirely. I passed an abandoned rest stop. The lights long dead. The parking lot a dark slab of concrete. Something about it made my chest tighten. I slowed, peering into the lot, straining to see any sign of the hitchhiker, any trace that I hadn't been alone all this time. But the lot was empty. Not a footprint. Not a discarded jacket. Not even a shimmer in the glass. Nothing. The road swallowed me again, miles and miles of black asphalt, broken only by fog-shrouded trees lining the edges. My shoulders ached from tension. My vision blurred slightly from exhaustion. But still I pressed on. The back seat remained empty. The imprint had disappeared, yet the feeling didn't fade. I could feel it, like a low vibration through the cab, a pulse that matched my own heartbeat. Every curve of the road felt the same. Every tree looked like it had been there forever, watching, waiting. I passed mile marker after mile marker, numbers repeating, roads twisting back upon themselves. Or maybe that was only the fog playing tricks. I couldn't tell. I didn't want to. My focus had narrowed to the road, the cab, the impossibility of quiet presence. I thought about turning off the headlights, just for a moment, to see if the darkness would reveal something, anything. But my fingers stayed glued to the wheel. Light, darkness, none of it mattered. The weight of whatever had been with me didn't need visibility. It simply existed at the edges, patient, unmoving, always there. My mind began to wander to the impossible. What had it wanted? Why appear and vanish? Why leave that imprint behind? Was it curious, malicious, or indifferent? Simply existing alongside me, brushing against my reality like wind against skin? I didn't know. And the not knowing was worse than any answer I could imagine. Hours passed. Fog thickened. Exhaustion tugged at my eyelids. But I dared not sleep. Not now. Not ever again on that stretch of highway. Every time I closed my eyes, the image returned. The thumb pressed into the seat, the shadow curling the edges, the impossibility of a figure that could be everywhere and nowhere. I drove until the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, pale light leaking into the fog. Even then, I didn't feel relief. The night hadn't ended. The road hadn't released me. The presence hadn't left. It had simply receded, like a tide pulling back, leaving the imprint in memory, in the tightening of my chest, in the sense that I had survived, but barely. By the time the sun broke fully, turning the fog to mist in the highway to ordinary gray asphalt, I found a gas station and pulled in. I kept the engine running, hands trembling on the wheel, eyes flicking constantly to the back seat. Empty, truly empty now. The imprint was gone, washed away, or perhaps it had simply faded from this world, leaving only the memory and the terror that had pressed into me. I sat there for long minutes, maybe an hour, staring at the dark line of road behind the station. I wanted to tell myself it was over, that the impossible had vanished, that I had escaped. But I didn't believe it, not fully, because some things linger. Some things leave traces you cannot see, marks on your mind that don't wash away with daylight. Some things follow you silently, endlessly, for as long as you dare to remember them. I finally stepped out of the cab, gasping for air, the cold morning mist hitting my face. I looked back at the road one last time before turning into the station. Miles of quiet stretched behind me, endless and unbroken, and though the hitchhiker was gone, I could feel the memory of its presence crawling the edges of my mind, like smoke clinging to skin, like the whisper of wind in the fog. I didn't know if I would ever drive that road at night again. I didn't know if I could. And I didn't know if the next person to see that impossible figure would be me or someone else. But I knew one thing for certain. The miles of quiet never stopped, and neither did the watching. Even now, years later, I remember the wet imprint, the shadow curling at its edge, the feeling that I had never really been alone. I try not to think of it, but every time I hear tires on wet asphalt, or a whisper through the wind, or the soft of an engine in the dead of night, the memory wakes. And I know that miles of quiet aren't empty. They never are.